Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to call this December meeting of the Cleveland Heights Planning Commission to order. I will note that all of our commissioners are present with the exception of Commissioner Wobig. Do we know if that's a planned absence?
She did not mention if she's
Okay.
coming.
All right, we'll continue on. We can always make a note when she arrives. We have the minutes of the November 12th meeting. Were there any changes or edits?
I think there's a correction that needs to be made. I think there's one correction that needs to be made. If I remember right, and Commissioner Miles, if you could correct me, the minutes showed that the vote was 6-1 in favor, and I believe you were an abstention. So it should be 5-1-1.
I'll correct that.
Thank you.
Although I did just learn yesterday that abstentions count as in favor for, but I'm not sure if that's for council or planning commission. So if we can just. Okay, but maybe just we can add a note that there was an abstention. It was Law Director Hannah. It's somewhere in our code. Somewhere. Yeah. And again, we'll just ask the Assistant Law Director to confirm that, and then the minutes will be done accordingly. So we'll have the minutes entered into the record with that change. If planning staff could let me know if I need to sign a different copy, let me know, but I've signed this one. Okay, great. Okay, before we get started, and I know we have a great group here, thanks for coming out in the snow, but this is a very special night because after 26 years of sitting on the Planning Commission, this is Commissioner Horowitz's last meeting. So we did a thing. We got you a present. Okay.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Now, you don't have to open it yet. You could save it for Hanukkah, but we have the picture of what we got you. Now, we didn't have the authority, hold on, the next one. We didn't have the authority to get you the actual key to the city, but we got you this instead. So it's a key in a glass cloche, so be careful. And on the bottom, hold on, I'll tell you, can we, I didn't think this through and I can't read that from here, but we'll tell you. I will tell you what it says on the bottom. 1 second, as soon as I get it up on my phone. It's, oh, good. With our deepest appreciation for decades of exceptional service to Cleveland Heights, Leonard Horowitz, you have done immeasurable good for the residents of the city and have shown us all what it means to serve. And that's not all. In there, there were so many members of the commission and council that contributed that we're also giving you and Cheryl some gift cards for Cedar Lee. It's gift cards. In there is to the Wine Spot. You will get one electronically to New Bagel. And then when Cedar Lee Theater opens at a time that I could get there, you will also get a gift card to Cedar Lee. So spend your mornings, afternoons, and nights. Your Wednesday evenings, every second Wednesday of every month is now free. So we've said a lot. There was a resolution, but anybody else want to say anything, staff? Anybody?
I would. I wasn't able to be there, Lenny, at the council meeting last week when you were celebrated for your service. I was in grandbaby duty in New Jersey, but I just wanted to express my thanks to all the help you've given me on the commission over the years, your knowledge, your experience, and so forth. It's been invaluable, and you've really been an asset to the community. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the planning department, we also wanted to do something for Lenny and Jessica. Lenny, we want to say to you, and I personally want to say to you, that I'm going to miss seeing you come in, walking past, smiling, and asking me how my day was, and thanking me for what it is that we do here in the planning department. You are an asset that cannot be replaced, so whoever does sit in that third seat has a huge shoe to fill. You will truly be missed, your input in each case and how you take the time to point out things that maybe someone may miss. We truly appreciate that. And as planning staff, that means a lot to us because a lot of people don't realize what goes on in the planning department or assumes, but you always make it a time to say thank you to us. And that truly means a lot. So we do have a gift for you that I'm going to get up and give to you in a moment. And then Jessica, we want to thank you also. I've been with you guys for almost 10 years now. And I've seen you not only be a member, but be a vice chair and then to be the chair. So we want to thank you in your transition that you've had here with the Planning Commission as you go on to bigger and better things. So we wish you both the best. And I will still see you within the building.
Yes.
So, but Lenny, I probably will see you having some coffee or a bagel somewhere. So it'd be nice to catch up with you on a personal level.
No, just going to be more relaxed. That's all. Okay, great. I'm so thrilled. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Now let's get to work. Thank you. Thank you so much. No, you get this one down here, Lenny. This one down here. Don't worry. Okay. All right. Thank you. Thanks for bearing with us through that. Okay, we're going to just do a quick switch on the agenda because we anticipate that the severance case will take a little bit longer than Park Synagogue. So let's start with the Park Synagogue staff report. Brooke, are you going to?
The applicant is actually starting with the presentation.
And just for the record, Commissioner Wobig has joined us. Oh, yes. Before you start, we'll have anyone who's going to speak tonight at any point, members of the public, applicants, anyone, if you could stand, please. Our Assistant Law Director will swear you in.
Can each of you affirm that you will testify to the truth?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. You may be seated.
Sit there, James. All right, good evening. Thank you for allowing us to jump a little bit here. This should be fairly quick. So we are here today asking for a conditional use permit for a temporary condition of the parking lot along Mayfield Road, formerly known as the Cleveland Heights School Bus Parking Lot. So we're requesting a conditional use on a temporary basis for the use of Honda dealerships excess inventory. Of course, they're a well-known dealership just down the street of Mayfield, and they need some extra room for vehicle storage. And this seems to time well with the project while we are under construction with the phase 1 and waiting for the phase 2 to happen along Mayfield Road. So this is the existing site plan and the approved development plan. So we're referring to the portion labeled A1, future mixed use, which is still very much the intent of that property. And then this is our approved phase 1 plan, which we are in for permits on and wrapping up adjudication, addendums, and looking to be under construction in early next year. And so we're referring to the parking lot, which you can see striped in this approved plan there on the bottom left. This was the approved existing parking schedule and proposed schedule. So just a reference of how that parking lot used to be laid out for the bus parking there on the left, and what is proposed to be a little bit more conducive to vehicle parking and a higher density on the left there, as approved in the phase 1 plan. This is an enlargement of those existing versus proposed conditions. So the request is the 252 spaces to be used on a temporary basis. A couple things will need to be modified just in the short term during construction, in fact. So the middle drive off of Mayfield, we're proposing to put a temporary traffic barrier to separate the traffic that currently pulls into that drive and flows into the parking lot. We would create that barrier for that drive to stay continuous without coming into the lot. The lot would then have one point of access off the far western drive, access to Mayfield Road. There we would locate a sign that's temporary. It's just a standard traffic sign for Honda, saying that it's Honda parking only. All vehicles in violation would be towed. There's no intent to put any other security measures in place beyond passive security, so there would be cameras, and they plan to have a former police vehicle parked and moved around to give people the clear understanding that they're being watched. There's also just the general security of the site that will be driving by this on a very regular basis. So that is our very brief presentation. Any questions we can answer?
Yes, I'll kick us off here. What is I would say one overarching concern is entering into any sort of long-term
Sure.
agreement that might impede the development of the site. So what is the length of the lease that's being contemplated, and what are the thoughts around that?
Josh,
You have to
you wanna
come up
jump in the mic?
And sorry, if you could just state your name once.
My name is Joshua Rosen. I'm with SCA. The intent was to have an agreement that would be for 5 years, but after 3 years with 6 months notice, we would have the option to end the agreement.
And are you aware that staff's recommendation was to limit this to 2 years with a 1-year renewal?
I was made aware of that today.
Okay. How do you feel about that?
I've done enough expressing my feelings over the many months. I would at the very least like at least a few more months than 2 years so that we can enter, so there's time to enter into a lease, get the signs made and everything. So I don't know when the clock would start, like would it start today if it was approved or?
No, I think that the lease is not to exceed 2 years.
Oh, okay, and then so we would, then I guess if,
You would have 8.
the way I look at it, I'll tell you the way I look at it, which is construction is going to take 2 years and it's going to take a year to plan a project there, assuming that Cleveland Heights is ready for a project of that size, that it's investment grade, that it's a stable environment to develop in. So it's a minimum of 3 years before we would ever need the lot. So when they approached us and they said, listen, we're trying to find a way of putting all our inventory and staying in Cleveland Heights, we thought this was a great idea. But obviously, I'm not the planning department or the planning commission, so.
Well, you said 2 years to build, but how would they build if there was a lease in place?
No, I mean, we're not going to do anything on a phase 2 site until phase 1 is done.
I see.
I want to see how
You
the
were talking
market
about
absorbs
phase
it. I
1.
want to see what it's like to work in Cleveland Heights. If we are going to do a mixed-use building there, it's going to be at least 3 years from today.
Okay. And then do you already have a draft lease or something that you're discussing? And would that allow, what if 2 years from now, somebody comes and says, I want to take this property right now, or we
Well,
want
the way the original lease was written was that after 2.5 years, we can give notice and it would end on the third year. At the end.
6 months.
Yeah, the 6 more months, sorry, yeah.
Do you know if that's a typical situation? Don't leases normally have 30-day?
Commercial,
Termination?
most of our commercial tenants, we have 6 months notice if they want to renew, and we have 6 months notice if we want to renew.
Interesting.
Residential, I typically am 60 days out.
Okay. Before I move to the other commissioners, I just had another. What about, you talked about security a little bit. What about screening or any concerns around lighting? Is there a plan for shrubbery or fencing?
We were going to do the same plan that the city had approved with the buses, just sort of the existing lights that exist.
Okay.
Yeah, just to build on that for a second. So we do have existing poles that will be maintained, and they're working in order now. They're
Lights, you mean?
yeah, sorry, poles with lights. Apologize. And actually, it's not in the interest of Honda to have screening because they want the visibility of the cars. They feel that that'll make it more secure for potential vandalism. If it's screened, it becomes a potential nuisance.
Okay. Any other questions from the commissioners? Go ahead. Just turn the mic on. Till the very end, Len.
Really, I know. Why is there all of a sudden this need for 250 additional parking spaces? Did I get it? There you go.
Hi, James Clark, General Manager, Honda Cleveland Heights. So if you're aware, we do a large volume of used cars, right? And we've been in business in Cleveland Heights for well over 40 years when Lee started the business. So, but one of the things I would share with you is that because we do so many used cars now, we don't have enough space. So it's a disaster at Medusa, right? You guys want those cars off the grass. I know you've made it clear. And so we will get all those cars off the grass. We probably won't park a lot of cars at Medusa because it's not as safe over there. There's been times where there's homeless people living in those cars and stuff. Whereas if we're south of Mayfield, it'll be a nice conducive situation. Plus, all our cars will be in one central location.
Okay.
Any other
And
questions?
I'm sorry. And your goal is to expand the property at the dealership.
Well, I think you know that Honda is going to have us redo the building, right? You guys have probably met with some of our planners and architects, I would guess. So the goal is to, have that space for, if we have a need right now, and then for us to be able to utilize that space for as long as we can until we get that construction done. Plus we, obviously are going to park a lot of our cars there because we have, 350 used cars at any given point in time.
Okay, but remodeling the building, how does that create additional parking space?
Well, when we remodel the building, I'm not going to use that parking space for that. I'm going to use that for my inventory. But right now, as it is, we're going to be remodeling the building, so we're going to need every space we can.
Oh, okay.
Because we have the solar. Everybody knows about the solar, right?
Yeah.
So that's all the, we're a net zero facility. We're a green facility. So we don't have as many spaces when we put that solar in as we did before either.
Okay, thank you.
Before you depart, one more question. Do you have plans? I mean, this is ostensibly a 3-year agreement with the anticipation that the space will ultimately be developed. Does Honda have, you had said for as long as possible, what's the plan for after?
We're searching. We had the Lee Road parking garage before they put up the apartment building. I mean, we're constantly looking for, space. Being landlocked in Cleveland Heights is tough, especially when we're in retail. It's difficult for consumers. They show up at the dealership that, those cars are just, that lot will be just for storage. It won't be like for retail sales. So we have to shuttle, right? And we have to be careful, getting on a Mayfield Road. So there's, a lot of things that go into it, but I will tell you that the location is much more secure than Medusa. And Medusa's a disaster. There's rats living in that building. We have a lot of expense, with wiring harnesses, $20,000, $30,000 at least a year just to replace wiring harnesses and used cars because the rats get up in there and they eat them. So don't want to be graphic, but we're right by the garbage factory too. So.
Commissioner Brown?
Yeah, when you were first describing things, my recollection was that level.
Is your mic, sorry, yeah. Just talk right in.
That top level of the Cedar Lee Meadowbrook garage, I remember that was being leased
Yes.
for car storage. And now that project is happening, I assume that those cars can't be parked there anymore.
Correct.
Is that part of the reason that you need?
Oh, of course. I mean,
Okay.
and the other thing is it's a disaster to have all those cars on the lawn at Medusa. I think you know what I'm talking about. It's an eyesore, right? So for the community, for us, I don't like that any more than you do. So when we're landlocked like that, it's tough. I'm also leasing space behind Walgreens. I lease that from for the, not the Giles, but the Martin Group. So just for space over there, and I'm leasing space from Toyota, behind Toyota, and I still don't have enough space. So.
Any other questions from the commissioners for the applicant? Then we'll go to staff. Nope. Okay, thank you very much. We might come back to you if we need to, but so don't go anywhere yet. I want to turn to staff now around the duration of the lease because the conditional use permit language that was in the staff report is limited to a lease not to exceed 2 years in duration with required annual renewal requests to be reviewed by the Planning Commission for the continuation of this use beyond that time period. So given the testimony of the applicant, what is the sense of planning staff around it? It sounds like a 3-year lease.
Yeah, we were just thinking about development and the future of the site.
So the additional information around why 3 years, it rings true to us. And so we are more open to that consideration of 3 years should the Planning Commission want to make it a 3-year permit.
I think I would be okay with that. We'd have to amend number 3 on the staff recommendation. Are there any thoughts from the other commissioners as to the duration of the lease and the conditions related to that?
It seems like the applicant has presented, it seems like the applicant has presented good information as to why this won't be a conflict with future development of the site. So I think this makes sense.
Any other comments?
I'm okay with it.
Okay.
With it as amended.
Oh, well, we haven't amended it yet, but yes.
Discussed.
All right, and I guess if I could have, Josh, if you want to come up, let me just get on the record. So what we're contemplating now is for number 3 of the staff recommendation, that the lease with Honda of Cleveland Heights is not to exceed 3 years in duration, but I would like to see that be in the structure that you noted, which is a 2-year lease with the 6-month notification and then 6 months too. And so
The 2-year and 6-month mark,
correct.
you would either note, we would come back and then we would say, okay, we need more time. For whatever
Correct.
reason, or the lease.
In 6 months, the lease will be terminated or
Exactly.
will expire or get permission again. So, all right. And you're okay with that?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. You can be seated. So for number 3, and I'm going to ask for the assistant law director's assistance with the rewording. I think we would be okay with saying that the lease with Honda of Cleveland Heights is not to exceed 3 years in duration, with required annual renew requests to be reviewed by the Planning Commission for the continuation of this use beyond that time period. And I want to add to that the review should occur at the 2-year and 6-month point of the lease. Okay. So, Brooke, I see you writing it down. Okay. Are there any other questions? I will just say one more thing. I think planning staff had asked about fencing and shrubbery. I'm convinced by the applicant's testimony, and I want to go with their recommendation that we don't do fencing for security reasons. Okay, staff is indicating that they're amenable to that. Any other changes or any other questions or issues we want to address here? Okay. Let's have a motion for the staff recommendation as written, and then once we have that seconded, let's do an amendment to that, which we'll do a motion for, and then we'll take a vote on the amendment and then take a vote on the original motion.
So moved.
Okay. So you're moving, Lenny, for staff recommendation as written in the staff report on project 25-23.
Yes.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Would somebody like to make a motion for the amendment?
Why not? I move
Your
that-
day, Len.
Yeah, there you go. That the third item on the staff recommendation be changed to not to exceed 3 years in
And-
duration. And
The review should occur.
review should occur after 2.5 years.
Yeah, I think the subsequent review for renewal, subsequent
There you go.
renewal review. Okay. Thank you. And since you moved on the original motion, I presume you're friendly to your own amendment.
Yes, I am.
Okay. Is there a second on the amendment?
Second.
Okay. Commissioner Brown beat you. Vice Chair Gainier, thank you. Any discussion on the amendment? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. That's unanimous, no abstentions. And now we will move towards the motion itself. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
It's unanimous. That's approved. Congratulations. Congratulations to Honda. The business should continue to grow and be an asset to us in Cleveland Heights. So thank you to the Park Synagogue folks and to Honda. You do not need to stay for the, yeah, yes. All right, thank you. Okay. Now, what we are all here for. We're going to move on to project number 25-22, which is Severance Town Center. We have Ryan Porter here from MPACT. Ryan, you're going to be presenting to us first? Okay. Just as you get set up, just a note for everyone here. So I want to clarify, the Planning Commission has already voted to recommend this, the ordinances, the two ordinances to council. So tonight we are not voting. We are taking it on, because we've already made the vote, and procedurally, the ordinances now sit with council for their approval, disapproval, or tabling, whatever choice they may make. But what we're doing here is taking the unusual step, because our first meeting, because of timing, we had to decide about the recommendation at our November meeting. We're taking the unusual step of revisiting our recommendation, not revisiting our recommendations, but revisiting the plan to consider additional recommendations for council that will be included in the plan, the zoning plan and text and zoning code amendments that'll be considered by council. But all that being said, we've actually had a lot of work in between our November 12th meeting and today. We've had a lot of public comment and a lot of, as anybody who's looked at the record online, we've actually, myself, had a number of substantive comments that I believe many of them have been incorporated. Council President Larson, Mayor Kuda, number of council members. So we, all of that has been discussed with MPACT, and we've made, I think, some progress on that front. So how I'd like to run this, unless there's a strong objection from staff, is that we'll have Ryan present to us whatever you'd like to share with us. But I think the changes that have been discussed and accepted by MPACT since our last meeting and since through all your discussions with the public, et cetera, then what I'd like to do is open it up to public comment so we could hear from the public. Then I'll have Ryan, maybe I'll have you come up again to respond to public comment. Then we will go if staff wants to add anything, and then we'll come back to the commission and we'll go through whatever remaining issues that we wanted to address. So that's the plan. Hang in there. We're going to try to get out of here before 11 o'clock tonight, unlike the last meeting. Okay, Ryan, it's all you now.
All right, Ryan Porter, MPACT Collective. Thank you, everybody, for having me this evening. Thank you to the community for showing up. Thank you to the commission. I didn't prepare like a long presentation, but I'll just reiterate what the chair said. We have responded to, I think, 80 comments since the last meeting. There's 70 that were posted last week. With the comments and the response, some of those items are a little repetitive, a couple of them. Some of those items are less comments about the plan and more kind of general thoughts. So it's a mixed bag, but we've tried to be responsive to everything that's come in, and we have made a ton of changes. So I'm not going to present all those changes tonight because we're actually going to publish a new code, hopefully by Friday, in advance of the public hearing is the goal. But I'm happy to go over any changes that the commission wants to go over. I just don't want to present changes to folks that don't care about certain changes, right? So, but I did think it was beneficial to at least have the amended regulating plan up here for us to talk through, because there was a lot of things related to that regulating plan, I think, as part of the discussion. And, you know, there are some, you know, changes that have occurred. I feel like I overheard there's folks in like the Crest neighborhood here or folks in those neighborhoods here, which I totally understand. And I just want to explain that I have had a Zoom with some of those neighbors, one or two of which are here tonight. So I just want to be really clear about that as one of the pieces of this equation. So let me talk about that for a second. So we've changed the wording on the buffer area to a conservation area, just to make that clear. I think there's been a lot of confusion around the word buffer area. I think there was some thought that we could do something in that area because it was called a buffer. So we're calling it a conservation area. It is conserving the trees. It's not touching any of the trees. It's creating that conservation and creating a buffer from where development can occur from that neighborhood. There was like a suggested road network in Block 21 that we've removed. per conversations with some of that neighborhood. Probably most impactful is that we had suggested a potential road connection, frankly, to the southern neighborhood, not the eastern neighborhood, but that came up as a very controversial issue. So we've removed that to both, and the only thing showing right now on the regulating plan are the existing pathways that are existing today. So all we're suggesting is that if that pathway gets rebuilt, maybe we make it a little nicer, but nobody's suggesting anything additional to what exists today. So I thought that would be important. So again, the buffer area is
Ryan,
now
sorry
a
to
conservation
interrupt.
area.
Could we
Yeah.
just zoom in so we see the map clearer for the folks that are here? Is that possible? Oh, Ryan, I think you have to zoom in.
Yeah, I don't know if I can zoom in because this is a PDF.
Oh.
Probably escape. Yeah, I can do this. I can do this, folks.
Okay.
All right, we're gonna give this a roar.
We have a copy in front of us. I just want.
Yeah. No, of course. Sorry.
That's okay.
All right, let's get this going. All right.
Perfect. Okay.
So I can be
Great.
a little animated. Again, this is this conservation area, and we took very detailed measurements to make sure we weren't touching not just the trees in the conservation areas that abut the neighborhood, but also the trees, and you can see in this conservation area right here. So technically right now, our conservation boundary to the rear of the single family homes to the south and to the east is basically the same as under the S1 zoning. So this is what the conservation is under the S1 zoning. What the S1 zoning I don't believe includes is all the area that we added to it, which is where the trees exist here.
Right. That's
Added additional conservation area. And I want to just kind of back up also and reiterate to the community and the commission that this is a zoning code. This isn't a plan, right? So this basically says if someone who owns property on block 36 or block 30 or block 21, the post office, it's not a Verizon building, I'm sorry. Spectrum, sorry. If they someday wanted to develop, they could opt into this zoning code and develop under this code. It's not saying they're going to, it's not saying there's a plan for them to. It's basically just saying they have the optionality of doing that because the thesis here is that we want to make sure that we're going to redevelop the circle, right, Severn Circle, to be a walkable road that circles the inner part of the circle. And we want both sides of the street to have place, right? You don't want kind of this island downtown where you have a big circle around it that has no opportunity for the same type of development across the street. So that's why we put this optional overlay zone on top of these other properties, but it's totally optional. We have no control over whether they develop. They could stick with their S1 zoning. They could do nothing. I had a long conversation with the church this morning, right, about that. So, I've been talking to all these property owners about that. But, A, this is not a plan. B, it's optional. C, we've changed the colors to make them a little bit more distinct here, and we've added some hatching to distinguish between SO1, SO2, and SO3. SO1 being the densest core along Burger Boulevard. P.S. We've added a note to the code that those street names can change if the city wants to change them. They're just temporary placeholders. But in the current Burger Boulevard, we've added that's the S1 district, that darkest color, right? And that's where the heights can go the highest, right? And the densities can be the most. SO2 is less dense, and then SO3, the lightest color along those borders with the single family homes, those areas are the areas that can only go to 2 stories. Okay, so we've, the concept from a planning perspective is that when you have a downtown, you have the highest density in the core, and then as you work out towards the single family homes, the density drops to match the single family homes, right? So that's the thesis, and that's what the regulating plan and the zoning calls for. I'm just kind of off the top of my head thinking of things, several people didn't like the, I'll call it the square or the diamond shape space that we put near City Hall, right? So we've changed that in consultation with both Transportation Committee members. I know some of the SAG folks didn't like that. We've come up with what's called a peanut roundabout that we're suggesting for that area. And we've tried to kind of extend green space from our suggested larger green space to run up the Berger Boulevard to connect to the civic center of the City Hall.
Now, I wanted to ask you about that because the green space here has changed, and that's one of the topics we wanted to discuss tonight. Yep. That green path from by block 11.
Yep.
What is the approximate square footage of that? I mean, it's very hard to tell.
Sure.
Size.
So I added to the code square footages. I think they're in acreages for each block.
Okay.
I have them up here tonight. I can tell you that the bigger square green space is about 2 acres. I don't know what the additional linear space exactly is, but I guess just eyeing it is probably an acre to acre and a half of land running along that. And remember, the code calls for 10% of every site area to provide additional civic space. So when someone comes in to develop Block 25, they have to provide 10% of their site area for additional civic space, or they have to buy out of a portion of that can go into a fund. And we've changed the code per some of the concerns specifically from SAG, such that the road network can be realigned to create any civic space. So if there was a big central park that was desired, that could happen. We have to figure out the economics and how that deal would actually work, but the code allows that to happen. So there's nothing restricting that.
Right. And, to be candid on this, and maybe let's dig into it now before we get to public comment to see where we can end up. But one of my biggest comments to staff was that I was concerned about the lack of significant green space in a consolidated area to create some sort of public gathering space. I remain concerned with the green space as indicated here because the green space right above block 16 is Dave's right now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So my question
I don't know that it's exactly where Dave's is.
But there is a building there right now. It's not empty and it's not a parking lot. So my question to you is, what I was recommending was block 7 and 12 becoming more of a central green space. So I guess my question to you is, what was the opposition to that, and why, if you're going to keep the green space where Dave's is, why do you still have block 11 there and not creating more green space there? Just walk us through, because I'm still concerned that this doesn't, and then I'll add to that, my concern is that even with the 10% requirement for civic space in each block, that civic space can be, that requirement can be met by having internal green space. So that doesn't necessarily require right now, as it's written, public green space. It's one of the options, but it could also be a courtyard in the middle of a building that's not accessible to the public. What I'm trying to do, and what I think we've heard from the community, is have some sort of large central public green space. So walk us through how you ended up with this configuration that you brought us to.
Sure, of course. Today. So first of all, I want to be clear because, Dave's is an existing operation, right? I've had discussions with the Saltzmans about moving them at some point.
Yes.
That building is 30 plus years old, I think. So at some point it will reach its lifespan, and that is, from my understanding from them, too large a format of a store for what they would typically want to be in. So we've been having discussions about moving them, but that's not going to happen for a long time, right? Like my personal, so the zoning code, let's be clear. The zoning code does not dictate the phasing, right? So the phasing, if someone came in and they said, wow, I really want to be on block 20, right? They could start with block 20, right? That's the flexibility that we're trying to create here. Use flexibility, timing flexibility, desire flexibility. That's how we encourage investment to happen, right? By being less stringent on exactly how things should go, right? That's why we write a regulating plan and a code versus an upfront master plan, right? Which by the time you get to year 4, it's obsolete, right? So that's the thesis. So first, I just want to make sure that it's clear that Dave's isn't moving today, right? Second, the economics of this deal will require that the first developments have the least lift, right? So they're going to be the hardest to finance, right? So my thesis, and I don't know that this is going to turn out this way, is that I will hopefully be able to get the first investment and development to occur on Block 7, 8, those areas, right? Because they are the closest to City Hall. They have the least impediment to development because they are surface lots, and they also have the least space around them, right? Because my deal with NAMDAR is that I have a certain period of time to develop, right? And they have a certain period of time to lease sections of the site while we're working on it. Obviously, like you just talked about with Park Synagogue, right? If someone signed a lease on the old movie theater site, it would be a problem, right? They sign a 10-year lease. I can't do anything for 10 years, right? So the way the deal worked with NAMDAR was because those are the most vacant areas, I was able to convince them to allow me to block any leases, okay, for the Walmart and for the movie theater, right? They can sign up to 10-year leases for everything else, right? Because there are areas of the site that they're still leasing, right? Near where the Office Max is and all this kind of stuff. Like they're gonna be coming in, I think, with something else, right? Soon. There's obviously all the areas where Subway is and all that stuff, right? Which has leases. Some of it is not leased, but some of it is leased, right? So the thesis here is how do you move around the site in a way in which you can develop on the lowest hanging fruit up front, right? Not have to impede NAMDAR's ability to continue to operate with people that are operating right now, right? And as you move your way around the site, you can then move people into new spaces or compensate them for leaving. But that's why we set this up this way. And that's why the green space was suggested to go where it is. We believe very strongly that a main street area is more appropriate than a Central Park for the center of a downtown. We also studied a lot of places around here. We looked at Van Aken. We looked at Crocker Park. I mean, Crocker Park has like 16,000 feet of open space total, right? And only about 5,000 of that is green, okay? So we're talking about a fraction. And I'm not saying that we want to be Crocker Park or people want to be Crocker Park, but our program is like 10x that of what we're suggesting.
Right.
So,
I think the difference, there's a significant difference between Crocker Park and this site in that Crocker Park is a destination shopping area, whereas this is right in the middle of the city, right in front of City Hall. Like, I don't know where, I think Crocker Park's in Westlake. I don't know, Bay Village. I don't know where their City Hall is, but the proximity to City Hall and the high level of civic engagement that we have in our city and the fact that we don't necessarily have a central gathering place for protests, demonstrations, festivals, positive celebrations, everything. So my question to you is, I understand about Block 7 and I find that compelling. How opposed are you to turning Block 11 into a green space to have a significant contiguous green space from City Hall down into the center? Block 11 is by the Peanut.
Oh, right, that corner?
Peanut, yep.
Yeah, I mean, we're
I mean, that looks to me, if the green space of Dave's is 2 acres, that looks like 1 acre. So you're talking about like 4 acres of green space approximately from what you're telling me.
I mean, I guess my issue is I'm trying to line the street with activity, right? Because that's what creates a good urban space, right? So if we start putting like parks along these, like some of these big streets, right? Like Severn Circle, it defeats the walkability, right? When you're walking down the road and you have a big break in the walkability and the activity, it's less walkable and urban than what we're trying to achieve for a downtown that's healthy, right? When you go to most downtowns across this country and most downtowns that were built hundreds of years ago, like the ones you have, right? Some of the main streets that you have here, right? They don't have big breaks for large park systems that you walk by. I mean, I'm not saying that that's a fact for every one of them, but the majority are not like that. So I think it's important to front, like we even debated the concept of not fronting Burger where Block 11 is the way we did, but we heard the community around the connection to the civic use at City Hall, and we thought this was a good compromise between the two concepts of keeping the activity, right, on the street frontage, but also providing some connectivity. Now, I do also want to be very clear, right? Like the code doesn't prevent that from changing. It literally specifically says, if we wanted to realign the blocks, right, and the roads now, we can do that to create that space. Somebody's got to figure out how to pay for that land, build that park, finance maintenance of it, right? All that stuff has to get figured out, which is like another level of conversation, right? Just like the financing for the roads and all this other stuff, which is like the next step of this process, have to happen. So the desire to have the park on, to include block 11, it's not off the table because it's allowable under the code, right? But there's a ton of things that need to get figured out before something like that could happen, right? Because I can't go to NAMDAR, right, who has a bottom line that they expect and say, hey, I told you I'd try to get to this value so that we could transact and get this downtown built. But by the way, you got to go donate 4 acres of land up front, right? Like that's probably not a conversation I can have today, right? And that's just the reality of it, right? So we have to figure all that out, which I'm willing to do. But I don't know that making the change now makes the difference, right? Because we might decide it should be on block 12, or SAG might be right, and we might decide it should be in the middle on Burger Boulevard. But we have to figure out a ton of things to make that work. So this was my suggestion of how it should be placed from a planning perspective with my planning team, my staff, and your staff. It can change, right? But the harder conversation is frankly around the financing. So my preference would be not to shuffle deck chairs around right now, when in reality, there's a lot of work to do to come to how that's going to get implemented, right? I mean, you might want it to be more on block 11. Someone in the crowd might want it to be on block 18. Someone else down the road might say block 25, right? So it's a hard thing to decide today. And we've allowed the flexibility in the code to change it tomorrow.
Right. And I think I hear what you're saying. I think the concern is that the map looks like what the map looks like, and that raises the anxiety of the community because it's not clear what is going to happen with the financing, and it's not clear what's going to happen with the development.
I'm just as anxious, right? I have 2 years of money and time into this thing with no visibility as to what the financing is going to be on this thing, because nothing gets built here without tax abatements, right? You have existing tax abatements that are part of the code today, right? There has to be infrastructure, like this road has to be rebuilt. It's owned by the city. It's not owned by NAMDAR or me, right? So we have to figure out how to finance that. So I have agita too around how all of this stuff is going to get financed, right? But this code is a regulating plan. It's a code. I think it does the work that it's supposed to do, which is it forces developers and investors to build in a manner that creates walkability, right? The exact placement of this green space concept, if we move it around, we're just moving pieces around, and there's not really a reality till we figure out how to finance it, which is, again, the next step of this process, right? If the city says when we're having TIF conversations and NCA conversations and CRA conversations with, I just got off with the school district the other day, right? Like when we have all these conversations in the first quarter and second quarter of next year, right? We can have very real conversations around how we can finance additional larger green space beyond what I'm requiring in the code. I don't mind that conversation at all, of course, but it's also got to be in the context of how we fix this road. It's also got to be in the context of what happens when, the sewers hit capacity, after 1 million gallons per day, right? So all these things need to be discussed, and they're all part of a bigger financing strategy, which I'm trying to tackle as the next step in this process, right? So that's kind of my response.
Okay. That was definitely a deep dive into one of the areas that was on my list. But is there anything else that you want to share? Because there are, and this is online. The commissioners have this in front of us, but this is online. These are all the comments that were submitted with a comment by comment response from Ryan. Is there anything else you want to share?
Well, I have another graphic I want to start on. So the roads, I thought we should bring up the roads again, because I think it just also highlights a bunch of the roads that we removed. I guess we kind of already talked about it on the regulating plan, but I just also want to make sure that you understand, like, your transportation committee chair and members have been, we've made a lot of changes to roads. So from the November 4th submission to today's submission, to today's document, there are a lot of changes that have made the roads. We thought we built roads that were suggested roads that were very pedestrian friendly and very multimodal, right? The Transportation Committee pushed us to another level of that, right? Which is good, right? And we made 90% of those changes, right? So things like, instead of just having an unprotected bike lane, having a cycle track, instead of, going to a 12-foot lane in some places, maxing it out at 11 drive line, right? So all these things were done as part of this effort with partners, right? The city hired a consultant that worked with us for a little bit. We had to work with the fire department to make sure that these roads are what they should do, and also make sure that they're at the intensity that is appropriate, right? Obviously, the A streets are more intense, right, because of the size and what they carry than when you get into like B streets and C streets, and then pedestrian paths are just pedestrian paths. So I thought that was worth mentioning. And this was something
this was going to be my next question to you, is about the parking.
All
So
right.
go.
Maybe we won't do all the words, but we'll just look at the diagram. How about that? So the code, there seems to be some misconception out there that there could be giant swaths of surface parking that people stare at. That's not allowed, okay? So let's be 100% clear about that. Surface parking is allowed. It's not allowed to be visible, okay? So the code requires that there has to be a minimum of a 16-foot setback, right? From the build to line to the surface parking lot, right? So in this type of building, you'd be building what's called a podium building, where you'd have some retail or something, or a lobby up front, and you'd have parking hidden behind that tucks under the building. There are a lot of buildings that wouldn't be built like that, right? They'd be 30 or 60 foot deep buildings with the parking in the center of a courtyard, right? But the zoning does not allow you to have a surface parking lot that faces the street. It has to be hidden behind a building. It even goes as far as to make sure that when you're dealing with, and I'll zoom out, so you have the 16-foot setback, we have build to line and frontage occupancy that prevents surface parking. We have frontage standards that prevent surface parking on the street frontage. We have street type controls that prevent surface fronting on the standards. And even on civic space, we have edging requirements so that if you build a civic space that has parking, you have to have edging requirements. So you think you build your big 2-acre park or 4-acre park, whatever it is, and you have to have a parking lot for it. We actually even have edging requirements to prevent someone walking by that civic space on the sidewalk from having to stare at the surface parking lot, right? They have to have landscaping and things like that to block the surface parking. I would love to build nothing but structured parking here, right? The question is the economics of structured parking strong enough, or is the economics here strong enough to build structured parking in the early phases, right? If I can, I will, because it conserves more land. If I can't, then we will hide parking in the kind of courtyards of the buildings, basically.
You've been in Cleveland Heights quite a bit since we started this, but we have, in our business districts right now, Cedar Lee, even on South Taylor, we have these surface parking lots behind the buildings where we have driveways off the main roads. Explain how this would require the entrance to the surface parks to be still behind the buildings. So you would have to go onto a side road to get to the surface parking lot, or does this allow for entrances to surface parking behind the buildings to come off the main streets?
Don't know up front whether it regulates where the drive aisle entrance to the parking lot is, but the street frontage, regardless of what street it is on, whether it be a side street or a main street, has to have buildings that are basically blocking the view of the parking. So maybe there's a drive aisle that enters in between buildings. Which is what I'm asking about. You got to get to the parking lot somehow, right? So, and you're not going to fly to it. So you got to,
Not yet.
Not yet. So we, these buildings will have curb cuts that have drive aisles that drive behind the buildings to park, right? They will, right? Okay. You have to get there. So you would have that condition even if you had a structured parking garage, right? So,
I'm sorry I didn't ask this before we moved off the green space topic, but are there any other questions on either one of these big topics for Ryan? Did you have? No. Okay. Okay. Anything else that came up through the last?
Again, there were 70 comments. It's like, I could stand up here probably for hours going through each one, but I think the more effective thing is I hit some of the highlights that I know you wanted to talk about post the last meeting. I'm happy to just sit, listen to some thoughts, listen to the community's thoughts, come back up, give feedback, iterate on it. So.
Commissioner Brown, one question. Just make sure your mic is on. Yeah.
One question. On the local roads that you show, what's the situation with sidewalks? Like, where are sidewalks? Where are they not?
Sure. So there's sidewalks required everywhere. Depending on the size and the typology of the road, the width of the sidewalk is different.
Yeah.
The whole sidewalk is regulated. So there's a furnishing zone regulation. There's a clear path regulation for each sidewalk, where people walk by it. There is a private frontage area where you could have dining or signage, right? Every one of the sidewalks is very highly regulated. I don't have the table in front of me, but they all have different, some of them are 12 foot in requirements. Some of them are 6 feet in requirement, right? Depending on the intensity of the area as designed, right? Or suggested, I should say.
Thank you.
And it relates to the size of the road, right?
Of course.
Yeah, so.
Okay, we'll let you sit down.
All right,
take a
thank
break. Do we want to leave the mouse and the keyboard up there? Or, you know what, why not, Ryan, sorry, now you sat down. But before, could you go back to the main map to keep it up just while we have public comment in case anybody wants to refer to it? And then by show of hands, who wants to give public comment tonight? Okay, I'm gonna start. We usually start on the left, on my left, so we'll start with Michael and then we'll go this way, okay? And friendly reminder, we don't have any time limits here in Planning Commission. I've always felt very strongly about that, but I'm going to ask you to self-monitor and I'll reserve the right to cut you off if you're going too long, and please just be as concise as possible. So Michael, we'll start with you. And we'll need your name and the street you live on for the minutes. Thank you.
Hello, there we go. My name is Michael. I live on Edge Hill Road. So I wanted to start off by saying that I'm really excited for these zoning changes, which is something I feel like you only really hear during a planning commission meeting. I'm excited because of the opportunities it presents, and I'm excited for a lot of the new public space that we've been hearing about, which is required by the zoning. I'm excited for the new shops. I'm excited for the new neighbors and a new Severance. I think currently it's in disrepair, and I think that this will hopefully move that into a better direction. And in my opinion, this is one of the ways we can get there. My worry is it's been kind of a long process, and if we don't do this now, if we don't make this happen, I worry that it's going to be another 10 years, 20 years before we try to do something else. And I think no one really wants that. No, I don't think anyone wants it to be the same. And I think that's something we can agree on. I think we disagree on some things, we agree on some things, but I think the thing that everyone agrees on is they want something to happen on Severance, even if we have different visions. And to me, this is the part of the point of the zoning change. It's not itself a single vision, but it allows for other visions to happen. Does someone want a shop? Does someone want a new bowling alley? Great, let's make that happen. I think this makes all of that easier. I think some of the criticism people have had about it not being having a vision or not being perfect, I think misses the forest through the trees. I think this allows for a greater vision for other people's visions to take root. And doing this to me is a choice between letting our zoning reflect our hopes and the things we want to see happen here in Severance, and in letting our fear of change and doing new things kind of keep us from moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris?
Just gonna go over this, it seems easier. My apologies.
Just like the baseball stadium. Yep, go ahead.
Oh, absolutely. Fair. Let's get this adjusted. Okay, good evening. My name is Chris Brace. I'm a resident of Cleveland Heights. I'm gonna read off my pad here a little. I'm here tonight to speak in strong support of the severance form-based overlay and to thank Ryan and the team at Impact for their hard work on this plan and to thank, of course, the Planning Commission and the city. The severance site is a gaping hole in the heart of our city. Under the current code, redevelopment is difficult, constrained, and always deeply delayed. A form-based code is more than helpful. It's essential if this site is ever going to function as a productive, connected part of Cleveland Heights once again. I also want to put this in a larger context. We are a city of roughly 44,000 residents, and we are now that small because we've been losing 300 people per year, every year since the 1960s. We once had 60,000 people in this city, and that decline is not an abstract. It shows up in deferred maintenance, deteriorating roads, and a growing pressure on our city's basic civic services. If we want to stabilize and reverse this downward trajectory, we need places like Severance to succeed, hard and soon. Since this overlay was first published 3 months ago, Impact has done tremendous work. They've engaged deeply with staff, with the Transportation and Mobility Committee, and with community feedback. We've gone from, a list of concerns the length of my arm to a bare handful. That doesn't happen by accident. It reflects serious effort to respond to this body and to this community to build something that works. Finally, I want to be clear that calls to delay this project are seriously misguided. Ryan and the team at Impact have a time-bounded agreement with NAMDAR. If we stall this project, there's a real risk that the owners of this property could walk away entirely. That would be unspeakably bad for this city. It could be the end. This has to happen. This is the framework by which a better future for Cleveland Heights is made. It's tremendously important. In that context, I, of course, still have quibbles. It wouldn't be me if I didn't. So I have two very specific recommendations that I think will improve the code while respecting the intention of the overlay and the commission's role. And if folks don't mind, I can just quickly pass these out. Yeah. My apologies.
That's okay, thank you.
I didn't agree. I'll keep this one brief. The overarching theme here is Planning Commission control and discretion. The SO3 zone is the transitional zone between the higher density core, the mid-density mid-layer, and the outer residential zones. In these zones, a couple of uses are currently prohibited, some on this list, some that I know are currently under work based on the feedback previously received. I think in all of these cases, the commission has previously approved similar projects elsewhere in the community. Low-rise multifamily residential, we're talking duplexes, condos, townhomes, like cottage courts. Projects like these have already been approved by the Planning Commission recently at the Taylor Road or Park Road Synagogue site. Dormitories, adaptive reuse for education can be a powerful tool for reversing blight. And hospitals. There's already a hospital in the SO3 zone. I think we should at least allow this as a conditional use. My request to the Planning Commission would be to ask council to consider requesting that each of these uses, low-rise multifamily, dormitory, and hospital, be moved from fully prohibited in SO3 to conditional use, which would restore discretionary power to the Planning Commission to approve projects that are appropriate in scope and vision for the SO3 zone. The other one is a minor height limit mismatch. The goal of the SO3 zone is to match in height and rough density the surrounding neighborhoods that are currently single-family zoned. Those single-family neighborhoods are limited to 35 feet, 2.5 stories, with the half story being furnished attic, furnished basement, something like that. This is the existing height limit for the single-family zones. It's also the height limit for the existing townhomes in the northeast corner. The current SO3 zoning caps it at 2 stories, though. 2 stories, 35 feet. I think this might just be a clerical oversight. 2.5 stories is a weird height limit to have in a zoning code, but I think that we should adjust the SO3 zoning height limit from 35 feet, 2 stories to 35 feet, 2.5 stories, which is what the current buildings in there already are residentially, and is the same as what we currently have in the rest of the single family zone. That's basically all I have for tonight. Thank you for taking the time. I strongly support this project, and I thank everyone involved for the time that they've put in, and appreciate you taking the time to listen to me tonight.
Thank you. I'm just going to take chair's prerogative to let you know 2 things. One, thank you for all the work of the Transportation and Mobility Committee. I know that's been a real asset, and that's taken a little bit of a load off the Planning Commission, which is very nice. The second thing is I have good news, because in the last Planning Commission meeting, we actually recommended that multifamily residential dormitories and hospitals are all should be conditionally permitted in SO3. It, of course, will be up to council whether or not to accept that, but Impact has agreed to those changes, so that's already incorporated. Staff, for planning staff, let's put Chris's second recommendation in the parking lot for us to discuss afterwards, because I'd like to get staff's opinion on that before we move forward. Okay, thank you very much.
And I want to say again, I started this process with like TMC requests, my own requests, a list of like 10, 20 big items, chunky things. Ryan and team have done a phenomenal job of working through that list, making changes where appropriate, communicating where things can't be changed. This has been incredible work, and I think this is basically ready to go.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Second, did you want to speak? No? Paul? Yes? No? Okay. Well, okay. Is there somebody, Carla and Councilman Cobb, do either one of you want to speak? No? Okay. Okay. Doug, go ahead. And just make sure you could pull the mic down a little bit when you get a chance.
Good evening, Douglas P. Whipple, 1518 South Taylor Road. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you tonight's top 10 list. These are the top 10 reasons why the impact severance plan is bad for you and me. Number 1, the impact plan does not create a desirable community where any of us would want to raise a family. Number 9, the impact plan does not provide for a spacious central community park. Number 8, the impact plan is overrun with vehicle roads and access lanes rather than pedestrian walkways and green space. Number 7, the impact plan includes unsightly, environmentally harsh surface parking lots. Number 6, the impact plan allows for buildings taller than those in the Macy's Target complex in University Heights. Number 5, the impact plan does not prevent the blight of retail spaces that are unprofitable and therefore vacant, such as on Coventry Road. Number 4, the impact plan, although a form-based plan, is a deficient and hodgepodge form-based plan. Number 3, the impact plan had proposed permitting Severance traffic onto nearby residential streets. Now, we all heard tonight, Mr. Porter indicated that that plan to permit to enable traffic on the residential roads has been withdrawn. Today is December 10. When the Public Commission had this before them, that reassurance wasn't in what you approved, wasn't before you. What City Council presented in its first publication of this wasn't before them at that time. There has been no opportunity for the public until today to have any feedback or input on whatever the new proposal happens to be. Mr. Porter's talked about many revisions between November 4 and now, for which the public hasn't yet seen and has not had an opportunity to have feedback. I suggest that the impact plan is a plan of disorderly chaos. And I remind everybody that this is the city of Cleveland Heights, not high school student council. Number two, the impact plan downplays and defers the adopting of good solutions for utilities, sewage, and stormwater management. And the number one reason why the impact severance plan is bad for you and me is that NAMDAR has been fined $29 million and has received criminal charges for what it did to a mall in Pennsylvania. And that multi-million-dollar fine was just last month. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else on this side of the room before we move to the next? Okay, this side of the room. Raise hands again, who wants to speak? All right, let's start in the back with Lou and then Harriet, and then we'll do the front row, and then we'll go that way. Thank you.
Lou Radovojevich, Middlehurst Road. I guess I have a couple questions right now. I'm just interested in knowing, is the relationship with Impact and with NAMDAR, has the city signed an agreement, or do we still have an opportunity to step back and reconsider that move?
Okay, so just for our public comment, same as the council meeting. So just give us all your questions, and then we'll either answer them right after, or we'll save it for when we get back to the commission.
Well, let me start by just reading a paragraph from a piece that I got from the planning department last week during the planning committee. It's that form-based code fact sheet that was done by AARP. There's a paragraph that resonated with me, and I just want to share it. It's on the bottom section on page 2. It said, codes adopted as the result of a proactive public process are far more successful than those produced without engaging the public in defining the community's vision. When code was applied with little public input, developer pushback has been the strongest. And that came from this particular sheet they're given. And my segue goes into community engagement. Now, it's my understanding that you've recently received 70 new comments to this. I'm working off data of comments that were done in 2022. There were 136 comments that I've read about severance that was given. That's how we created the vision. So of that, I read those things, I've read them twice, and I try and get an idea on what are the non-negotiables for the residents, what matters most to us, not in terms of buildings or whatever, but what matters most. And then make sure that when we negotiate, those things are untouchable as we move forward. That survey closed October 31st, 2022. MPEC's engagement took place with NAMDAR in June 2024. That's a big difference in time. I can tell you as a resident, I didn't bother at all chiming in 2022. You know why? Because it was run by a private developer. There's nothing that I could say that would make a difference because he never showed up. We knew that he was silent for 10 years and there was nothing. So it was a waste of time. It was a waste of time for a lot of residents to chime in at that time. So I urge you, before we go further, we need to do the same thing that we did with accessory dwelling units. Let me put it in perspective. I take 136 plus what, 70 more that we got comments of recently. We're at 200 plus. The accessory dwelling units did a great job. So the planning department, awesome. That was spot on. That was 2 months of asking. You got over 550 responses for accessory dwelling units. Look at the deer control population. That survey just got over 800 comments from our residents. Out of 2,300 out of the county, 800 came from Cleveland Heights. So when it's a good survey, we get engaged, and that's critical. So to me, that's a vital step for us. Rather than trying to push this through right now, we need to go through those motions. That's my ask. I mean, regardless of what the content is, that to me is a big area to engage on. Questions I do have that maybe you can ask further. I can't find anywhere prior work experience with Impact and NAMDAR. To me, I need to know the working relationship. Because the NAMDAR's definitely got a reputation out there, and I need to know that you've got something that we can look at, a case study that says this is what we've done together with specifically NAMDAR. That's one of my questions. Another question I would have is I understand NAMDAR is going to be an owner in this long-term relationship. If that's the case, what percentage of a minority ownership is this? Is it 1%? Is it 49%? Are we dealing with Impact or are we dealing with NAMDAR? And I think that's critical because we need to look at NAMDAR. So when I look at shopping centers, and we know that NAMDAR's already got well over 100 shopping centers across the country, can somebody please share with the residents case studies of a shopping center that was redeveloped through NAMDAR and that the community benefited? It wasn't just for financial gains, but actually the community benefited from that change in redevelopment. And then we're always looking at tenants. This is form-based. So if it's form-based, then it really doesn't matter exactly who the tenants are, right? It's all about cosmetics, about aesthetics, everything going together. So we get excited. We picture Van Aken. We picture all these type of tenants that would matter to us in Cleveland Heights. But the system right now, to implement this right now without a vision, that concerns me because now what I need to do is I need to look at NAMDAR. I need to look at the tenants that exist right now out of over 100 shopping centers and take that. And know what you see? You see dollar stores. You see Burlington coat factories. You might see vape stores. I don't know, but that's more likely to happen at Severance than anything that we wish for free reign. So that's something that matters. And and the last question I have here is simply by putting this in now of giving this tomorrow, if NAMDAR were to step away, did the value of his property right now increase just by putting in the zoning? Did it increase for him not doing anything? So if he walked away from this deal, from this vision, did we just increase the value of his property? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Harriet, do you want to?
My name's Harriet Applegate. I lived on Crest Road. Thank you, Ryan, for listening to David and I on our immediate concern about this area. I like those changes. That was, taking away the.
Just, sorry, you can move the mic to you if you want.
Sorry, removing the C1 road from, the entrance, it makes a big difference. I'd love to see the C1 road, this medical center way that runs into Dobama Avenue gone too, but hey, it's progress, so that's good. And also thank you to Jessica for raising, I think, a big concern with the Central Park, so I'm not gonna deal with that. I do have some other questions about the overall project. I've been trying to go back and forth between Exhibit A and Exhibit B and make sense of things. And I cannot find what the regulatory plan is. There's a reference to it in the civic space part. It says it can be found at the on 1149, 11B5, but there is no B5. So I'd like to see what the regulatory plan is. Is the map the regulatory plan? Yeah. The map is, okay, it's
This
the
is
map.
on top. It says 11. Yeah.
Okay, all right, so. Okay.
You don't read zoning codes often?
Yeah, well, I mean, it has 4, and then underneath 4, there's no 5, so the map is 5. Okay, got it. Okay, that's a question answered. The other thing is, I think the biggest problem with this project so far is the removal of accountability. And by accountability, I mean elected official accountability. I remember in the early days of SAG, and maybe it was only me, but I thought the Board of Control was, yikes, I just broke something. Oh dear. Your mouse. Maybe it's only battery, sorry.
I think it'll survive. It'll be fine. We'll figure it out. That's okay.
I thought the Board of Control was really neat. It only applies to severance. It has 3 members of the 5 are accountable to the public. It has the mayor, the president of council, and the chairperson of the Planning and Development Committee. I think that is great. And all these other committees, you know, with all due respect to you wonderful people here, you're appointed. And we like, and this is Cleveland Heights, you know, we like citizen participation. And how do the citizens participate other than through city council? Actually, in hearings like this as well, so we appreciate that. But I think the public accountability aspect, it's not like the city loses oversight, it's the voters through their elected representatives who lose oversight in this. And I would hate to see the dissolution of the Board of Control. The only objection to the Board of Control I've heard is that it couldn't be convened a couple of times. Well, guess why? It was because Mayor Sarin didn't want to convene it. That's gone. So I think that is, there's no reason to get rid of the Board of Control because it's the citizens' route to accountability. And we appreciate very much that the Planning Commission has been so generous in listening to public comments, and that I don't want to diminish that, but I think elected officials need to be a much bigger part of what goes on at Severance. It's probably the one parcel in our city that everybody cares the most about. That's shown up in survey after survey, that even people on the far edges of the city, they put Severance, doing something at Severance as number 1. And with all due respect to my good friend, Michael Bending, there's no fear of change on the people that aren't jumping up and down for this. We all want, we all want development Severance. And I guess that maybe the biggest difference, Ryan talks about a downtown. I think people in Cleveland Heights talk about a village, and I think there's a big difference between that. And the Central Park is part of that, where, as Jessica pointed out, people can come and gather. You know, in the summer they can do the splash pad, in the winter they can do the skating. You know, it's a place where people can gather, and that's why I think it's super important to the residents of Cleveland Heights. I will say there's a difference between civic space and green space, and I think I think that's very key in the surveys. It's green space that people want, and they don't want fragmented green space. When you want green space, you don't want little pieces of it here and there. What you really want is, I think, something that people can come to and enjoy with their fellow residents. So that's all I have. Oh, one other thing. I can't find who's on the technical advisory committee. I remember hearing Ryan say, police chief, fire chief, maybe the planning commission chair, and maybe one member of city council. If there's one member of city council on the technical advisory committee, that's a single elected official that has anything to do with once this zoning ever goes into place, and once you have a developer, there's no public way to get to the developer. And that's my biggest concern. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to put those questions with Lou's and Chris's one question in the parking lot. And we're going to circle back because I think we'll need input from me, staff, and Ryan on all of that. Okay. Larry, are you, well, and Council President Larson, you didn't want to speak, did you? No? Okay. Larry, you'll be next.
I want to, like a couple of other people tonight.
Just name and
Oh, I'm
street.
sorry, Larry Nowak, I live on Edge Hill, and you're probably sick of me. I want to thank Ryan and you for having made some important steps in the right direction with regards to the Central Park. I don't consider it a done deal and safe yet, but we have moved in the right direction. And we've talked a great deal about this within SAG, and we've talked publicly about this village and the park as an integrating device. We talked about, I was talking to the people on my committee, and we were in the middle of this hot spell last August, you may recall, and it was just brutal. And we were talking about if we had a park here in Severance and it had a splash pad, every kid in Cleveland Heights, regardless of color, shape, size, age, or anything else, would have been in that splash pad. And it would be a wonderful vehicle for pulling things together. And their parents, by the way, could have sat over on one of the terraced areas and watched somebody do a performance. So anyway, we think this, we've talked about this ad nauseum, and I apologize for that, but we think it's really essential. It's the heart of the city, okay? I am not, by the way, here to tell you what should be built at Severance. But I'm going to tell you a couple of things that I've recently learned as we've gone through this process of reviewing this overlay that Ryan has built. And I can tell you what cannot be built with this overlay, okay? I can tell you that if a developer walked in tomorrow morning and said, I have this plan by somebody named Volpe, I don't know who the hell he is, but if it's a great plan and I'd like to build it, it could not be done with that. It simply cannot be done. Things don't fit. They don't work together. It doesn't go. And I don't know if Paul agrees with that or not, but I can tell you that's my interpretation of what's going on. And I have been told this by people who make their life and living around zoning issues, many of whom are here in Cleveland Heights. And that is their position, that could not happen. They also said, and you have acknowledged by changing it, that you couldn't put a major central park in this because the roads don't allow it. And the roads are the structure of what Ryan has pulled together here. So Ryan and the city, as my understanding, are now working on trying to find a way to phrase a creation of the ability to flex the roads to accommodate a park. It's called a civic space, but in this case, we're talking about the park because that's the one that's really difficult. So anyway, you couldn't do it without an amendment. And you can't do many of the other things we want to do without an amendment either. We cannot have anything close to what SAG created. We cannot have anything close to what Paul drew. And it's all because of the street layout. And my concern is I don't know what I don't know about this. I spent 4 hours today having more fun than I could possibly imagine trying to read my way through the remarks and the corrections that were in the documents that you all have created, which, by the way, represents a remarkable amount of work on both of your parts, and thank you for that. It also turns up some scary things. There's a point at point 44 where the response is, and the build out on this may take 30 years. I think the idea of having the center of Cleveland Heights being a building zone for 30 years is unacceptable. Very simply, you just can't do it. And I don't know how you get people to move in the first 5 years if you tell them you're going to love the view of the cranes for the next 25 years, okay? I think it's got to be a faster scale. And Ryan will say, I'd love to do it faster, but there are constraints, and there are. But I don't think there are as many as Ryan and some of the other people think there are. And we need to explore that. This may be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for Cleveland Heights. And to the people who say delay is death, it isn't, folks. NAMDAR doesn't have an alternative for this. They're not going anywhere as long as Ryan is making progress. And we're not telling Ryan to stop making progress. We're asking for time to take long enough for everybody sitting there and sitting on city council to say when they vote, I know what I'm voting on. And I can tell you that I've spent a lot of time looking at this, and if I had to vote today, I wouldn't know what to vote because I wouldn't know what I was voting on. It's a really complex and extensive piece of work. And I think some of it's very good. And by the way, I want to clear out another point. I don't know anybody in this room probably, but certainly not on SAG, that opposes form-based zoning. We think that's the right direction to go. We just think this particular document of form-based zoning either needs some radical change or say an alternative framework. But whatever it is, we need to know what it is we're about to do, because it's going to go on forever. By the way, we talked about earlier, some people have been very concerned about what could you do with this if this falls apart. We started talking to outside developers 2.5 years ago, and we stopped because there was an agreement. What do you do to a developer? Goes, you're going to love this. You can't get the property because it's owned by a guy who won't sell it, and it's in an agreement with another guy who wants to develop it. But we were like talking about developing. It ain't going to fly, and it didn't fly. But every one of them said, but please keep us in the loop. And we got a list this long, folks. You folks live around Cleveland Heights. You live in the Cleveland area. You know, we're awash in developers that know what the heck they're doing with big developments. We ought to at least say, as the city, this is our vision. This is what we would like to have. Anybody out there interested in building it? And if the answers come back no, then we turn around and we maybe say to Ryan, go on aside. Do it. Or one of the other people. We've had 3 developers approach us in the last 4 years with an interest in developing Severance, which is another reason that I don't worry too much about whether or not this is the end of the line, if this is the end of the line for this concept. There are people out there who want to do things here. They're not what we want to do. And what we're trying to do is help Ryan get to doing what we would like to see done as a city. That's my thoughts for tonight.
Thank you. Who else in the front row? Dennis, did you want to speak? No. Okay, go ahead, sir. While you're walking, is there? No, I'm just asking, Dennis, your row. Who else wants to speak? You also?
Can you hear me?
That's it, right? Did you want to speak? Ma'am? No? Okay. Just figuring out where we are.
That's good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'd like to sit over there. May I speak?
You can stay where you are and you can also speak. I was going to do a last call. Sure. You're entitled. Okay, good. Just your name and your street, please.
Hi, Michael Morris. I live on Crest Road and own property on Severn Road. This is the first time I've seen this version of this map, so my prepared statement is a bit obsolete. So I'm going to have to trim it down just a little bit. I have a little bit different perspective from what we've been hearing. I'm going to start with just a couple things that I don't like on this. and then I'll talk a little bit about what I do like.
Yep, bring the mic with you. Thanks, perfect.
Okay, so first of all, I am glad to see we have fewer streets shown on here, but I would like to see, and it doesn't have to be right now, I would like to see any justification for Medical Center Way and Obama Avenue. Medical Center Way especially because it is right up against what is now labeled as the conservation area. And I think every property already has plenty of access from Severn Circle. And I don't see a reason why our zoning map needs to call for these two streets to be built. So I'd like to hear that addressed. I'm not sure I know what this Bee-Balm Way is. I do know this area. I haven't seen this. I am glad to see that we no longer have the Severance Road extension. Anyone who is actually familiar with this area knows that the school already has this road coming up to what we call the stables or the barns, and that an improvement along there could be worked out with the schools if that were desired. Anyone who is familiar with the Crest Walkway knows that that was closed off to prevent undesirables after many years of it being open because it was highly desired to be able to get to the mall and the post office from there. So we need people on Crest Road to weigh in on whether or not they think opening up the walkway is desirable or not, and whether a connection here is desirable or not. And I don't think the public has had any actual understanding of this because this is already significantly different from what we had before. Now, the next point, I'm glad to see we changed this terminology to say conservation area instead of buffer. I think that is a move in perspective to a better way of thinking about this tremendous resource that we have. What I'm disappointed in is that we have this tremendous resource and we still treat it just as a barrier to development rather than treating it as the resource we really should have. Now, I've written on this topic many times over many years under many threats of destroying this woodland area. I'm going to read one paragraph out of something that I wrote a while back because this has changed so much. I don't think my whole statement actually would be useful at this point. So let me just read this one paragraph. Bear with me, please. The woodlands surrounding Severance are a unique environmental resource, which should be understood as vital to our future. Any plan for our community should treat this as an asset for our community. Many of us choose to live here because the woodlands provide a better quality of life for our neighborhood and Cleveland Heights in general. These are not just a lot of trees. This is an ecosystem. This is a mile-long corridor stretching from South Taylor to Milliken School, and let me point that out. That entire continuous set of woodlands, including streams, both on the south border and up, and on the east border and west. Let me just, I'll step away from the microphone to point that out. The one green box that does not have a number on it is at the point where the Severance creeks that run around the edge of the former Severance estate go into the branch of the Dungway Brook that passes through Park Synagogue and onto the main branches of Dungway Brook. This area right here, the playground, is the high point. It's one of the highest points in Cleveland Heights. It is the high point of this part of the Dungway Brook watershed. This conservation area is a conservation area, not simply because that was a buffer for development, It is actually where we do have surface water, trees of many decades, wetlands, all of which is really in poor condition due to neglect and fragmented ownership. What we need is a vision that says, not only do we want to fix Severance, we want to take this whole area, which is now included in our form-based zoning, we want this whole area to be understood as an environmental resource that can be protected, that can be enhanced, and can be an asset and an attraction to our community for the future, not just an obstacle to development. And I think that's about as much as I wanted to say about this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. Sir.
Okay, hi. My name is Joseph Lurchbacher. I live at 2662 Shaker, so just down the road on South Taylor. I've lived in Cleveland Heights for about a decade. I'm the crazy person that rides my bike to work or to the grocery store all year, even on days like this. Although, before any of you call me out in the parking lot, I did drive here, sorry. So as a majority pedestrian, I get really interested whenever I hear words like dense or walkable or urban said in a planning meeting, because I feel like, ooh, I might get something that I want for change. And I don't think this is perfect, but I do think that this is good. And I think it's a major improvement over what we have now, which is a rotting parking lot, and it has been the whole time I've lived here, and the last 15 years that I've been, on the east side of Cleveland. I think several of the 10 reasons why I don't want this that was presented by the gentleman earlier are exactly the sort of thing that I want. And I don't think that building like a big central park in this would solve everyone's problems in the way that it seems like some of my neighbors think. I mean, I had to pass Kane Park to get here, which will be bigger than anything we could build in this space. And Kane Park hasn't solved all of Cleveland Heights' problems. As someone that lives in Cleveland Heights, I feel like I have a lot of access to green spaces and parks. Maybe not all of them are in Cleveland Heights, but that's okay. I feel like what Cleveland Heights lacks the most is urban places. I mean, I live by Cedar Lee because I like the idea of walking to the movie theater from my unair-conditioned house when it's 90 degrees in the summer. And I would like to see more spaces like that here in Cleveland Heights. So I'm really in favor of this happening. I think it's what we should build in this space, and I would urge everyone to not avoid making any improvement or progress in pursuit of some perfection.
Thank you so much. Paul. Yes. I want to thank everyone. Everyone's done a really good job of sharing everything you want to share and allowing us to leave before 11 p.m. So thank you.
Thank you.
Keep it up, Paul.
I only need 20, 25 minutes. We'll be good. We'll be good. I wanted to check the time. No, we're good. I really wasn't going to say anything because I'm very frustrated. I'm frustrated with the process, not the intent of all this. I feel like we've been rushed. I feel like you guys made your mind up prematurely to vote on it at the last meeting and then have all these recommended changes with really no time to review. I also spent 4 hours today going through documents and copying them and highlighting them and everything else. I just think it's a bit of disservice to us and to you guys. My career as an architect and urban designer is over 40 years and growing. And I've done scores of large urban infill land use plans. I've never done a shopping mall, thank God. But, and I understand and have worked with form-based codes, have built things, not just talked about them. Okay, so I know how they work. And I've worked with planning commissions all over the region. And I highly respect what planning commissions do. And when they function well, as this one generally does, you guys do a great job in a city that desperately needs a highly functioning planning commission. With all the challenges we have, I can do nothing but say, let's stop for a minute and ask ourselves, what is the joy in this? When you look, this is the development plan. It's called a regulating plan. It's called a concept development plan. There is a notion about a development plan. I mean, it's called so many, but this is it. Where is the joy? Do you think most people look at this and even understand what it is or what it means? It's because it's not a development plan and it's not a form-based plan like the zoning. It doesn't represent what it is we as a community have just approved. We've approved a mechanism. With all due respect, I really like Ryan. He's one of the best salesmen I've ever seen in my life. I really think you ought to get in the used car business and work with the guys at Honda. But the bottom line is that he has a mission, a very delineated mission, which is to add value to the Namdar property, because that's all they care about. We know that. And to work out something that, if it works, will create enhanced revenue for them and revenue for him. Okay, and that's great, but what does it do for us? What does this form-based zoning, which is not a new thing and it's got magic words and it really doesn't mean anything more than I am, as an average citizen, don't have to use my imagination to understand what the zoning code is. Because here's a real plan that's got buildings and trees and more delineated sense of what the uses are. It's not just pictures, but it is form. And form is the basis of the zoning. And I have done these in multiple locations and they've worked and things have been built and people have gotten excited because there is joy in the planning process. And that doesn't exist here. And I think many of us are just frustrated. So we're saying, well, this is better than nothing. And if we don't do this, maybe nothing will happen and we'll have to have severance for another 50 years. That's not the case. We need to be aggressive. We need to be strategic. We need to be targeted. Yes, I totally agree with form-based zoning as the vehicle, but without a real conceptual development plan right at this stage, to me, it's virtually meaningless. And it's not going to excite developers. You name a developer in this city, in this region, I've worked with them. They've been a client of mine, including the biggest one that used to be here, Forest City. I did 4 development plans for them on big urban properties. The other thing I want to say before I finish is that, you know, again, with all due respect to Ryan, this is not a downtown and it'll never be one. And second of all, your experience with places like New Rochelle, that's totally different than this. Those are established communities and you're really infilling things, vacant lots and so forth. And we have that in our business districts. This is effectively, you could take a bulldozer and blow it all down, okay? It's a 166 acre piece of land that has 55 acres that are undeveloped, and we have the ability to do something with them. The thing that meant the most to me in the vision statement that we wrote, and I honestly think, well, I can't remember whose term this was because we got together, did it as a group. I know it wasn't mine because I didn't even understand it when it was first proposed. Maybe it was Larry's, which is why I didn't understand it. But the second line says, this is saying a redevelopment imagination ensure dynamic development spaces uses that are transformational and not incremental. What does that mean? Transformational means you imagine the whole thing and the way it works together as a unit, because this place needs to be transformed, okay? A bulldozer is the best solution. It's not gonna happen. Incremental means, like happens in most suburbs, we got a street, it already exists, and somebody builds a McDonald's here and a Walmart here and a housing subdivision here with cul-de-sacs, and those are increments of uses that happen that fall within the old Euclidean zoning methodology, okay? And therefore, the form-based zoning needs to inspire us to imagine what the whole is about, not just the parts. Otherwise, we recreate what we're seeing all over in this country. Well, I think that you have to understand there is not a nickel to redo Severance Circle, and Severance Circle is shot, it's done. We have to get the money to dig it up down to the base. It will require at least some new utilities, the right-of-way will change, all the paving will be redone. This is what happens. I've done this before on many, many streets. When all that gets done, we have the chance to realign it, to reshape it, to create the kind of environment on this 166 acres that is appropriate to what it is we want to build. Either way, it's got to be done. Now, we could throw a coat of asphalt on it, a couple of inches, and asphalt is cheap. 6, 7 years, it's done again, and Severance is a blank, 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 blank hole again, like it is today. We won't allow that to happen. We will not allow that to happen. There is not a nickel to tear down the shopping mall. There's not a nickel for that. It's got to go. Where's that money going to come from? Namdar's not going to spend it. He don't got it. Maybe he does, but I doubt that you do. And so where does it come from? Are developers going to come in and tear it down so they can build what we're proposing here? Mostly a lot of housing? That's not going to happen. We're going to have to go after federal dollars that go through the state, county money, and we're going to use other kinds of vehicles, most of which I've used on my projects that I've done for developers. We're going to have to do that. We haven't done that yet. We haven't chased any of that down yet. I know you've researched it. I wrote the application, and this isn't about me, but I wrote the application for the Circle Square project, and we got in the second round of the new transformational, mixed-use transformational development fund, $8 million to redo our roads in University Circle. And if you've driven around there, you see the high rises that we've built and all that. That's because we went through exactly this process, except the zoning pre-existed our planning. The city of Cleveland wrote its own form-based zoning. It was comprehensive, and it affected every aspect of the city, okay? It's worth looking into. It's an excellent code. I used it, it worked, we planned it. We've spent about, $280 million already, and we're gonna be we're starting the 4th tower very soon, and when we're done, we'll have spent over $500 million. This can work. The only other thing I want to say, because I want to reinforce it, is our recommendation, because I love working in the community sector with the SAG group. We're relentless. We're dedicated and we're committed, and we've earned a place at this table to work with you guys, our appointed leaders, to make the right decisions here. And certainly, we believe we have the ears of City Council. The bottom line is, there's no reason it has to be approved this month, none whatsoever. It will accomplish nothing, it will offer nothing, no advantages to the city of Cleveland Heights, other than it's going to create confusion in the future. Ryan, I believe you'll hang in with us, but the bottom line is, you know well that you're at risk. You have no agreement with the city of Cleveland Heights. Your agreement was with NAMDAR. Nobody in this room or in the city has seen that agreement, okay? I'm sure that's by choice. That's your business transaction with them. But we don't trust Namdar. So the only people we can really trust is ourselves, and hope that you can earn our trust if you're going to be in here hanging in with us. But we don't know that. But we have to envision a place that's worth something. Well, in reading this code, and Karen, you're one of the best code writers, other than that guy over there in the corner, that I know and I've had the chance to work with. But when I read this, it constantly refers to preliminary land use plan, preliminary development plan, page after page after page, both for the S1 district, and then he's got his own provisions in the stuff that he wrote. And the bottom line is, we need to do a preliminary, interchangeable word, conceptual development plan. There was one done. We never see it anymore because it was really terrible. So little thought was put into it, in my opinion, that Ryan doesn't even show it anymore. It's not in any of the documents that were put online, and it's this with all the orangey yellow buildings, right? We've all seen it. We haven't seen it for months. You won't find it in the city's website. It's gone. It vanished. Why? It was the beginning of a development plan that enabled us to start to imagine what this could be like. The problem is when we all started to imagine it, particularly my partners on SAG, all we saw was big yellow buildings, the size and the shape of apartment buildings that covered the whole length of a 300 or 400 foot city block, creating an urban wall, which we don't want. There was no connection to anything on the interior. If this is really a downtown, it should have a center, and the center should be more than a long linear parking lot. Whether it's a park or not, we can talk about that. But truthfully, this isn't a downtown. It really is an urban village, and it should complement the other urban villages that we have that are uniquely Cleveland Heights. If this happens right, those will get better. We'll do the same kind of infill there, and we'll get our population back over 50,000 the way it should be. And we have every reason to be that, because we are next door to the largest and fastest growing business development district in the state of Ohio, University Circle, over 50,000 employees. Okay? We haven't taken advantage of that. I talked to my good friend Chris Ronayne recently about this. He says, when are you guys going to come to me, Paul? When are you going to talk to me? We never talked to him when he was in University Circle, when he was the president of University Circle, and we haven't taken advantage of the fact that he's the county commissioner. And so when you look at this and you think about it, what I see is massive density, 2 big parking lots, and no joy whatsoever for our city. Okay? I didn't want to say anything because there was nothing to ask you guys. You've already made your minds up. You've already voted and approved it. But I felt like it was important enough to say this because it's never too late to think about at least things differently. And I'm hoping that you guys, as our planning commission, think a little differently about this after this meeting tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate all the input. Ryan, why don't you come back up? Because I presume we're going to need you for this. And I'm going to ask that we kind of have a free-form discussion between the applicant, planning staff, and the commission to answer some of the questions. And then potentially, to answer all of the questions, sorry. And then potentially go into some other questions or issues that we may want to bring up. So I'm going to go from the most recent speakers with questions to the top. I'm going to start with Michael. Michael's question about Medical Center Way, Dobama Avenue, and B-Bomb Way. Sure. So can you just provide the rationale for that?
Yeah, when our planning team put that together, it was obviously under the assumption that maybe someday that block gets redeveloped, right? So right now it's a hospital and some other uses. It might never go away, right? But we don't know what may happen 5, 10, 15 years from now. The concept was those are pretty big blocks and that you should have access to those blocks from multiple places. And roads, frankly, connect places, right? The Medical Center Way is kept away from the tree area, the conservation area. So I don't know if we want to add 20 more feet, we could, but that's the whole purpose of it, is to have a conservation area that protects all the trees. And the B-Bomb Way is a suggested pedestrian path to break that block, right? Is what that is. It doesn't mean it's going to get built, by the way. It's a suggestion that if someone develops that block someday, they should build that B-Bomb Way, right? I think the probability of that getting developed in the next 15 years is probably low, right? The reality is that, when the hospital's operating, it's, probably not going to stop operating in the next 15 years. But I think we need to be thinking long-term about this, and things will change over time. And I just want to be clear with everybody, like, this code can change in the future, right? Nothing's locked in forever. So I want to be clear about that. And markets will change. We tried to create a code that is super flexible so that it can adjust to markets over time. But things can change. So hopefully that was helpful. Yeah. I mean, there's fire access issues also, but I don't know that I want to get into that.
No, thank you for that. I want to move to Harriet's questions. Let's talk about the role of the TAC and the membership, because we actually did in the November meeting, we had the list, and then Planning Commission recommended that an appointed official, the chair of the Council's Planning and Development Committee, be added to that. But I want to ask first Karen Knittel to share what the role is of the Technical Advisory Committee in the process, and then anything, Ryan, that you want to add, and also the members. Do you have the list? I mean, I can find it also.
I don't have it directly in front of me, but I'm going to go by memory, and I think I remember, but Ryan will correct me if I've left somebody off. Oh, I have it right in front of me. Thank you, sir. Good counsel here. So it includes the zoning administrator, the public works.
Just to be clear, the zoning administrator is the director of planning and development at the city staff.
Correct. Public works director, the fire chief, the police chief, the chair of the planning commission, council's planning and development committee chair, chair of the architectural board of review, or their representatives. So that the intent for that committee is to serve as a technical group that would look at any proposal before they even submit their application. So if you're thinking about doing something, you can come in, sit down with this whole group. We can have fire weigh in on what they need to see from a site planning, police, all of these different perspectives. The idea is that those questions can iron out any questions or concerns that an applicant might have prior to them submitting their formal application, so that then they're ready to go forward and they understand what the zoning code is and what the fire code is and how they can create a project that meets both of those needs.
Yeah, and the color I'll add is that currently we don't have anything like this, and mostly it's just staff. And so appointed officials will, like me, or even council, will only see something after a plan has already
been submitted
for review. And we've said often that that is sometimes too late. So this gives maximum visibility across city staff, and also through council and the planning commission and architectural board of review, to be able to see the plan ahead of time.
And I think that the intent is to be friendly to developers, to help them understand what the code is and help them understand ways that they can navigate through the city's process.
Ryan, how do you, from your perspective, anything you want to add on the TAC?
I mean, I think Karen did a good job and the chair did a good job. I'll just emphasize that part of the goal here is to create this expedited review process, because we've set the rules up front, right? So, and it's not arbitrary, right? The problem with development a lot of times is that there's so little regulation to the form that it becomes arbitrary as to the decision as to whether development will move forward, which scares developers and investors. I mean, that's just the truth, right? So, and there are certain areas that the economics in this country, it's okay to scare developers, right? There are certain areas where the economics, you can't scare developers, and there's areas in between that, right? So I work in areas where, people, fight really hard to get land, and there's not a lot of land, and it's really competitive. And even there, we've convinced those municipalities that they should be using these types of procedures where they sit with the applicant up front, they're friendly to the applicant, they go through the rules up front, so they're not wasting their money and their time, right? Everybody gets on the same page with the people who are actually going to review and make sure that their plan is going to adhere to the code, so that the process is smoother when it gets submitted to the official, process, right? We want to make sure that up front there's some understanding, so that when it comes in, everybody's eyes wide open on what's happening, right? So I'm not really changing what you're saying. I'm just adding a little bit more emphasis to the importance of it.
Sure. Okay, let's talk about the Board of Control. I want to be clear that the removal of the Board of Control was a recommendation that came from planning staff. It has nothing to do with Ryan or MPACT. It actually only applies, confirm or deny, it only applies to the original S1 district, zoning district.
Correct. And quite honestly, it from staff's perspective, this is an important part of Cleveland Heights, but it's every piece of Cleveland Heights is important. And we have these boards and commissions that this is their routine. They meet monthly. They know the zoning code. They know process. And we just felt like it made sense for severance to fall under that same format. It's, something that can be considered or not considered as we move forward. But we were reflecting that we did have problems getting quorum, and it was multiple members that were not available is what happened. It was not one member. So I just wanted to correct the record that this was multiple members who weren't available for a period of 2 months. We had to delay holding a meeting because the Board of Control only meets when there's an application. And then we have to call the meeting and organize everybody's schedule and get it publicized and moving forward.
Yeah, and I'll add that it's in addition to, scheduling issues, we actually had conflicts of interest issues because some of the current tenants at Severance pose a conflict to more than one member of the Board of Control. And when you have a body of 5 and 2 members have to recuse themselves, you need 3 people, and then you have a very limited perspective on the cases. So the Planning Commission is 7 people. We've had recusals in the past before, but it usually only diminishes down to 6 or 5 members, giving us broader perspective. And so that was a part of it as well. And I think that some of the tenants of Severance, we aren't expecting to go anywhere anytime soon. And so those conflicts of interest will remain, perpetually requiring those members, as long as they're on the Board of Control, to recuse themselves. And so this is also part of it, to have this separate structure. So I will say that I found that it made sense when staff suggested that we move any approval process into the regular Planning Commission approval process. And again, the expertise, right? Board of Control, not to say that council doesn't have its own level of expertise, but certainly here.
Absolutely. And so that it would be also for if there was somebody under the current zoning that needed a variance, they would go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, which is routinely hearing cases and understands the semi-judicial nature of that process.
And just to be clear, and so we level set on the purpose of the Board of Control, they are providing conditional use permits in the same manner that Planning Commission provides conditional use permits to every other zoning district in the city. And so they're not approving development agreements, they're not entering to any other details. It is purely conditional use permit.
Correct. It's just the day-to-day land use management once you have a zoning code in place.
Correct.
So, and the same would be true for any variances.
Would go to Board of Zoning Appeals.
Correct. But currently it would go to the Board of Control.
Yes.
One comment along the lines of what you just said about the Board of Control.
Is your mic?
I don't know if it's on.
Okay.
Well, it was on, yeah.
So just be close. Just get closer.
Yeah. Along the lines of what you were just saying about the Board of Control, I agree that it's an unusual device to use I've never seen a city use it for development projects. I've seen them use it for fiscal issues and this and that. But, you know, the tried and true way of dealing with the development projects is planning commissions, architectural review boards, and sometimes the votes of city council where necessary. So I see it as just kind of fixing an oddity in the code. I did want to make one comment about the technical advisory committee.
Okay. Wait, just hold that for 1 second. Is anybody in disagreement and feel strongly that we should retain the Board of Control, or sorry, that we should recommend to council the retention of the Board of Control?
I do have a question regarding how clear that change was made to the public prior to our vote at the last meeting. And in general, how clear the changes to the interactions within the Planning Commission reviewing projects in the future at Severance were to the public. Based on my review of what was publicly shown, it wasn't clear. Based on the information that was presented us, the workflow was not fleshed out. It was not clear, and there's still a lot of questions on, where does a conditional use permit go, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's my big bucket question of how clear it was to the public prior to our vote.
Okay, let's hold that because I want to get back to that. Okay, so now on the TAC to continue with Harriet's questions.
Right, because I was going to make a comment, didn't speak loudly enough, you didn't hear me. But with respect to the Technical Advisory Committee, A, it is advisory. B, it includes heads of departments that any developer already will meet with. I think it's just saying, okay, the people you're already going to meet with, we're going to put them together into a little technical advisory committee, so you don't have to go from this office to that office, this office. But it doesn't change the people who are giving that technical advice. They are the people who are heads of the departments who have the expertise. So I don't really see that as the Technical Advisory Committee as a change. I think it's just organizing it in a more useful way for an applicant to be able to talk to these people. Okay, that was my point.
Thank you. Okay, so what I'm hearing is no changes to what has been part of the package regarding the Board of Control. Same with the Technical Advisory Committee. So those questions we have responded to. Now I want to go to Lou's questions, and I think Ryan will need more of you, more of your input on these, but I will refresh your memory.
Thank you.
Lou asked about what is the prior work experience between MPACT and NAMDAR, and if I'm going to paraphrase, I'll say, is this the first project that MPACT and NAMDAR have worked on together? And if not, what were the other ones? There was a question about what percentage ownership NAMDAR will have in the long term of Severance. And also I'll add to that, if you can explain the equity part of the agreement, like just expand on what NAMDAR's role will be under this agreement. And then is there a shopping center that's been redeveloped with NAMDAR as the owner that was successful? And I guess staff can opine on this also, but by just passing the zoning changes, does the value of the property increase? And I'm happy to repeat any questions, so start wherever you want.
Yeah, no, thank you. All right, so I think I've been saying this from literally the first presentation to council 2 years ago. My deal with NAMDAR is the first deal I've ever done with NAMDAR. I was approached by the planning director, actually, because of his experience with my firm on the East Coast, to try to contact NAMDAR because they happen to be a New York firm, right? So I approached NAMDAR as a firm. I told them what we do for a living and how we, run these master developer gigs, and that we typically do it in downtowns, right? To be clear, a lot of the downtowns we work in are literally all parking lots, right? It's because they've been basically disinvested and were torn down during urban renewal. So they are very similar conditions to here in a lot of senses. And my firm had been thinking about applying our model and our form-based zoning code and our approach to defunct malls. We actually were talking to some REITs in 2019 about doing it. So we had a lot of interest in bringing our model to mall redevelopment. I was asked to if I was interested in this project. I've again, never developed in Cleveland or Cleveland Heights or this, Northeast Ohio market before. I've been transparent from the beginning about that. It took me about 9 months to negotiate an agreement with NAMDAR. The agreement basically says that I have this 20-month period to get all the approvals, zoning approvals in place, right? And to also codify our agreed upon valuation on a phase-by-phase basis for the first phase extrapolated out. So if our value is agreed to as $10 per residential unit or $5 per square foot, I have to create that land value out of this process. And if I don't reach that goal, and you can imagine we negotiated that, right? Like I wanted it to be really low to make sure we can get this done, and they wanted it to be really high, right? And there was a long negotiation and underwriting around that and cost analysis around that and work I had to do to get comfortable with where we landed. And I actually have like some provisions in the agreement that give me some 20% leeway below that. So there's a lot of different factors that go into our document around how this functions. But ultimately, I have to accomplish all those things in the 20-month period. That 20-month period technically expires in February, right? So this is just one of those pieces, right? Until this has to get in place, then all the TIF stuff, tax abatement stuff, all that structure, which is not going to be an easy conversation also, has to be in place because there's no way investors, developers, myself, other sponsors, the 20 people SAG has that are going to do the table, they don't understand what the economics of the deal is until they know all those pieces of the equation, right? You have to understand what your taxes are. You have to understand what you can build, right? So you have to understand all that. So I try to set this up so that that understanding is set up in front. So they can all come in and say, oh, we get these rules. These rules make sense to us. They're economic. We understand what this is doing, right? And that's been very successful for me. In multiple places in bringing development forth. So no, I have not done a deal with NAMDAR. I'm not asking you to trust NAMDAR. I'm telling you I have a deal with NAMDAR, and it was really hard to get them to the table to do a deal. I don't particularly feel that they're bad people per se. I think I try to keep telling people that they own this giant portfolio of real estate assets. Malls is just one of the asset classes that they started buying in 2019. I'm not excusing their neglect by any means. And by the way, I've been working for over the last 2 years. Every month I meet with the city's code enforcement folks, with NAMDAR officials locally to try to help push them to fix things along the way, because I do believe that that's important. That's not part of my job, or it doesn't help me economically in any way, but I think it's important to our total partnership as a community and a group to do the right thing. So I do that effort anyways, and they've been somewhat responsive, not as responsive as maybe the city wants to be, but if you talk to code enforcement, there's been a lot of improvements. It's not the way people wanted to see. It's not the future of the site, clearly, but we have to block and tackle along the way. I am confident that this site is just a number on a spreadsheet for them, and that's how they treat it, right? Until I bring this to the table and I explain to them, this is a community, we need to do the right thing by this community, but we can do the right thing, we can make a great place, and you can make money, right? Like, you can do all those things. It's not easy, it takes a lot of work, but that's how my deal is set up with them. I don't know, did I answer most of those questions?
What percentage ownership does NAMDAR have in the long term?
Okay, so I don't know the answer to that, because my deal says if I hit my bogey in the first in development, they have to contribute the land into that development as equity, so that the developer and the investor, whether it be me or somebody else, doesn't actually have to come up with the cash to buy the land on that at that moment. What that does, and I specifically negotiated it that way, what that does is it makes the developments much more feasible, because they don't have to come up with that cash up front, right? So they contribute the land in as equity into what's called the GP, the general partnership, right? Then there's going to be usually limited partner equity that comes in, and there's a construction loan that comes in, and those components build the building. The person who puts the limited equity and the GP equity they're going to be a much bigger percentage of the dollar amount than the land. The land around here is probably only like 10% of the capital stack. The land in New York would be maybe like 20% of the capital stack, right? Because it's a lot more valuable land, right? So the prices are a lot higher. So they will have this small piece of equity in the deal. They will not be making decisions with a small piece of equity. I can guarantee you that, right? Now, could NAMDAR come along a year from now and say, hey, we want to put the equity in to build this building? They could do that, right? But they have to adhere to these rules just like any other developer, right? That's why the rules are set up the way the rules are set up, right? So do I expect them to do that? No, they're not developers. They've never been developers. They're owner-operators. That's what they do, right? So, you know, my intent is to work with my stable of developers and investors, right, to co-GP and build some of these buildings. Whoever SAG has that we've been talking about, that they've been talking to, can come in. Like, the whole point of this is that we set this whole chessboard up and multiple people can come and play at the same time, right? Like, that's how you set these things up. And that's how I've done it very successfully for 15 years, 20 years. So, you know, that's how it's set up. Hopefully that answers your question. But I can't give you an exact percentage of equity because you have to value the deal and figure out what the land component of that valuation is, right, at the time.
You talked about NAMDAR being an owner-operator and not a developer, so I'm going to presume the answer to whether a shopping center that was redeveloped with NAMDAR that was successful.
I haven't done it. I know that they're marketing all their malls, right? Like, they have like if you follow Dan Dilmany and NAMDAR on LinkedIn, you'll see every like month or so, he posts like a bunch of malls and shopping centers that they're marketing to developers to come work with. I think some of their sites are being developed, right? I'm not involved in all those. I'm working on 2 projects with them. This project and a small, it was like a former movie theater and a strip center on Long Island, right? Those are the 2 deals that I'm working on with them right now. But to be truthful, like, I've spent 90% of my time working with them on this. So, you know, this has been my passion. I believe strongly in this. You know, I don't see myself as a salesperson. I see myself as a developer who's passionate, right? And that's where I'm at. So.
Thank you. And then the last one, maybe in your estimation, does the value of the property increase just through the passage of the zoning overlay?
Yeah, typically zoning increases valuation. That's part of the gig, right? So there's a land lift when the zoning's in place. That being said, 0 will get built without us figuring out TIFs and tax abatements and how the road's going to be rebuilt and all that stuff. So it's kind of all, this is just one step of the process. But yeah, absolutely. But I think, you know, I would suggest that people not focus on me creating value for NAMDAR and more on the fact that I'm working with the city to create rules around this development that I believe will create great place, right? And I challenge anybody to go around this country and talk about this form-based zoning, but I will tell you this is very similar to the form-based zoning code that we wrote in multiple places, one of which is the city of New Rochelle that was mentioned. It is a very different place, right? So it has different height restrictions, it has all different components, but the code itself and the concept of creating walkability is similar. And that code won a APA award nationally. Okay, so this is not something I'm pulling out of nowhere, right? This is something that has been recognized nationally by some of the best. I mean, the DPZs of the world, right? Like, these are people that I've been working with for 15, 20 years and have known about this stuff.
Okay, thank you. I think that's all of Lou's specific questions. And now I want to go to Chris's question about 2.5 stories versus 2 stories in the SO3 planning staff. Do you have an opinion on that?
We typically think of our single family zoning as having a 35-foot maximum. And I think that the difficulty is in how you define stories and how tall, you know, because you could have a single floor that has 12-foot ceilings or 14-foot ceilings. So I think that, you know, in the zoning code, it makes sense for us to be thinking more in terms of the maximum height of the building as opposed to whether it's 2 stories or 2.5 stories.
But I think maybe the point was that actually in the text of the code, it does have a story limitation.
It does, yeah, all of ours do.
Right.
I think it says
we can talk about it offline. I'm happy to go to 2.5 stories. I mean, my sensitivity is to the neighborhood, right?
Right. I mean,
That's my sensitivity.
I
right?
think
So.
I think the intent is
Like
that
all these things I'm doing, I'm trying to do, like, creating a suggesting B-Bomb Way and a pedestrian path to the neighborhood. It doesn't benefit me long term, right? I do it because I think it's the right thing to do for the future of this place, walkability wise, right? So people can disagree with that, but my intentions are that, right? As far as 2 to 2.5 stories, I mean, we'll talk to planning staff and, perhaps we make it 2.5 stories, but, I don't want to make the decision on the spot right now.
That's fine. Okay. And I unless there's any other strong opinions on the commission, my strong opinion would be to retain 35 feet. I'm agnostic on these stories, but I do agree that the 35 feet to be in line, because what I don't want from the residential homes is to now, suddenly have larger buildings in front that potentially go higher than the trees, which I think might be impossible, but you never know.
Yeah, and just, we've been looking at back of the envelope shadow analysis stuff, right? Just some basic measurements. And, you have a big tree, the conservation area that, those trees are 20 to 30 feet, right? So you would never, even at 2.5 stories and 40 feet, you would probably never get any sort of shadowing on those homes because of those trees.
Right.
And that's similarly at 450 to 500 feet away in SO1. If you got to 7-8 stories, it's not going to affect those homes by any means when you look at the shadowing.
Yeah, Commissioner Wilbeck.
I'm reiterating what I said at the last meeting, which I voted no, did not support this. The lack of visualizations, the lack of development to what is being discussed and described. It's not possible to make an informed decision if 35 feet would be appropriate or not at this time. So.
Okay. Commissioner Brown.
And really to staff, one question to staff. Across the city of Cleveland Heights now, in the single family and the 2-family zoned areas, is the current standard 35 feet and 2.5 stories?
the current standard is 35 feet, a maximum of 35 feet, and that's dependent on what type of roof you have. So, a peak roof or a flat roof. So if it's a flat roof, it would be 35 feet to that flat roof. But if it's peak, it's 35 feet average between the peak and the eaves.
Right. So the house I'm
definition of height.
So the house I'm in has 2 full stories and then a half story where the roof slopes. And if you go into that 3rd floor, it's not a full story. It's kind of a half because the roof slopes and at the edges of that story. And a lot of houses in Cleveland Heights are like that.
Correct.
Okay. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. Any comment? Okay. I want to go back to Commissioner Wilbeck's question about the workflow, the approval flow process. We probably should have thought of this, prior, and I have a question about when we're going to have an updated package in general, but is there a possibility to have some sort of graphic or description of what a developer comes to the city, like the bill, Schoolhouse Rock, right? How a bill becomes a law. The developer comes to the city, what is the process under this code, kind of in layman's terms, instead of having to sift through the code pieces?
We probably could try to put together some type of a flow chart or something that's a little more graphic oriented to demonstrate what that is.
I think that would be helpful for the public hearing. But for our purposes right now, and to address Commissioner Wilbeck's, can one of you, either staff or Ryan, walk us through what that looks like? Yep, go ahead.
In particular, to compare...
Just closer to the mic.
In particular, to compare what might change from the existing process. So what rights might be changed for the public in consultation and providing comment, like a comparison chart.
I don't think the rights for the public for comment would be different. It would be a different board that they would be commenting to.
Right.
But that's just, you would come to Planning Commission as opposed to coming to the Board of Control to make a comment.
But after the TAC was already developing preliminary plans, correct?
No, they're helping them just get their application together. And what we find to be helpful with that is because often we have, even with the process we have developments get all the way through and then fire looks at something and has an issue because they didn't look at the floor plans, and now all of a sudden there has to be some redesigns and things are back to the drawing boards. So the attempt here is to help them get their application prepared properly so that when it's submitted and then the public process begins with the review and comment.
Because my understanding is typically with form-based code, there's a front-loaded public consultation piece that can last a year, 2 years, depending on how it's done. In Cleveland, lasted like a decade or something. So my concern is that if these decisions are made, the applicant is moving forward, developing it, and it gets to TAC, if sufficient public comment has been provided in this process, so that as the application is being considered, that when it gets to Planning Commission or before public comment, that the thought process was already there and the public can be assured that is reflective of the public will.
So I think a lot of the standards about design are already baked into this code, if I'm understanding what you're commenting on. So they would have to follow this code, and the intent of the TAC then is to make sure they understand what this code is telling them they need to be doing. And then then they would go ahead and move forward when they felt comfortable that they understood the code with developing their full packet that would have information that then could be looked at. Did I miss something, Ryan? Or
I don't think so. I mean, I think the commissioner's more saying that, if you don't mind, that you feel like there should have been more opportunity for the public to comment on those rules. Is that what you're saying?
And clear and explicit conversations so that they're informed in providing comment.
Understood. We can agree to disagree as to whether I did that or not, but I would love to spend time with you also one-on-one if you'd like to talk about any of the additional questions you may have specifically about the designs and the requirements within the code. If you don't want to, that's totally cool as well. But yeah, I mean, I think
Mostly concerned about a demonstrated process and bringing the receipts so that the public is comfortable with what they're hearing, which to date, we haven't heard comfortable response in general.
Okay.
Back to the original question of the workflow or the process flow. A developer says, maybe I want to do something in Severance. They have all the information online, theoretically, when our website gets updated. Everything's on there. They say, okay, I've seen the zoning code. Just interrupt when I'm getting something wrong. I've seen the zoning code. It looks quite intricate, but I'm still interested, so I want to make an inquiry with the city. They make an inquiry with planning. Planning says, come in and talk to our technical advisory committee. They come in and talk to the technical advisory committee. They're still not scared off. They say to themselves, great, we've had a number of meetings. I'm putting together a plan. I understand NAMDAR puts in the land for the equity. I've considered my capital stack. I'm putting together an actual application. Then what happens?
Just for information, you went into development mode as opposed to just zoning mode. So we wouldn't get all the information about the development and the equity. That would be a separate consideration. So we would just see the design and site plans, just like we typically see here within the Planning Commission.
Okay, no, I think that's an important point. So simultaneously, prospective developer will be working with MPACT on whatever the development agreement might be, since NAMDAR owns the land.
They would never bring up, very rarely would a developer or a partner of mine or me bring a plan in until we have some sort of deal on the land that you're planning on bringing the plan in on, right?
Okay, so that happens first.
You would do that.
Yeah.
You would do that. The developer, let's just pick a developer, Flaherty and Collins, because people know their name. I don't know whether they like them or they don't, but it's just a name. So they come to me and they'd say, hey, we like your zoning code and we like what you're doing here and we'd like to get involved. We'd have a negotiation between us. We'd agree upon what the contribution of the land would be. We'd agree upon roles in the GP and who's going to do what. Once that agreement was in place, this is a typical process, then a site plan and a conceptual plan would be developed. We'd bring that into the TAC. We'd meet with the TAC. We'd get feedback. Hey, is this consistent with the code? And this would happen with or without me, right? Someone goes to develop on, I don't know, I'm trying to pick a non-controversial block.
Let's say the church on
Yeah,
37.
fine. A block I have nothing to do with,
Right.
right? They would do the same process. They'd come into the TAC with their development plan. The TAC would sit down with them. They'd have a meeting. They'd say, oh, well, these are the things you're not meeting. These are the things you are meeting. Do you have questions for us? Maybe you should think about revising this, yada, yada. Fire might have concerns, this, that, right? Maybe something's come up recently around here that they can, impart upon them to help them, guide them. So that would happen, right? And then if the developer wants to come back for a second meeting, there's a time frame put in the code whereby the TAC has to provide them that second meeting. So the developer is not sitting there for 9 months waiting for their second TAC meeting, right? So we put a 30-day time frame where the developer would, from when the developer submits a second plan concept, that the TAC has to schedule that meeting, right? So that the developer doesn't submit their revised concept and then it just sits in the ether for months, right? And then after the TAC is finished, then the developer can submit into the official process, right? It goes to the ARB. The ARB has a 30-day period to give comments and suggestions to the Planning Commission. Then the Planning Commission has a 60-day period. It was originally 45. It was suggested to revise it to 60. A 60-day period to meet 2 meetings, right? To review the plan, make sure it's in conformance. If there's a conditional use that needs to be granted, decide on the conditional use, right? Those types of things. And then once it gets through that 60-day period, it's either approved or denied or approved with procedural conditions or things like that. And then ultimately the developer can now move on to building permits, right? Because your site civil is approved there, right? You still have to go through the permit process for your building permit, right? Which goes through a building department versus the planning department. And you have to design the full building, right? Everything has to be reviewed for fire and life safety, right? So then you can go through that process. But in general, you're comfortable that in that kind of 120-day range from when you start the process, you could have, if you're adhering to the code, a civil approval that kind of vests you for your project for a period of time. We match the period of time, I believe, in your current code that if you don't use your civil approvals, you lose it, right? Which is very standard. And, presumably this will help clarify process for developers and investors to go through this, zoning.
And to add to that, this is the same as any development where there's a private owner of the land that doesn't require a development agreement with the city to purchase land from the city. So any private owner of land here that might need a conditional use permit or might want to develop something that requires a conditional use permit can proceed without any council input whatsoever. It would come to the Planning Commission, and that
Correct.
is our authority.
Correct. And often what may happen would be they would come in and just meet with some planning staff to say, here's what we're thinking about doing. I think the advantage to having the technical advisory committee, sorry about my voice, is that we have the different disciplines there in the room. So, anytime you have more minds that you can see, more issues and questions to be sure that you're getting the best product you can get.
And my conclusion from this conversation is that actually, because Planning Commission recommended that the chair of the Planning and Development Committee from council be part of the TAC, we're actually putting into the code more council involvement and more accountability than we've ever had with a private development. And the other piece I wanted to say was that in terms of public comment, it remains the same amount of public comment because they would, and in fact, they would have a minimum 2 Planning Commission meetings for the public to come and comment. And with planning, with conditional use permits in general, we at least have 1 meeting. With larger developments, we've tried to do more than 1, but this memorializes it for 2.
Sure. We have the 60-day window. That's all right.
Right. Okay.
I do think you touched on something I feel like that Lou said that I want to be clear about.
Sure.
There's no contractual arrangement between us and the city. So I just want to be 100% clear about that, right? Like I made a private deal with a private landowner, which is very typical, right? And what we are doing is we're proposing a zoning change for a piece of land, right? So, obviously the city's role is whether they want to approve or disapprove. And by the way, if they approve the zoning today, they could change it in April. So to be 100% clear, right? There's nothing that prevents that, like I said, but there's no contractual arrangement. I do oftentimes do public-private partnerships with cities and municipalities whereby the land I'm actually working on development are the city-owned lands. So I've gone through this process frankly, most of my career doing that. It's rare that my work is mostly on private land. So I'm very experienced with working through municipal agreements and process, but here that was not required because the city doesn't own any of the land. The city does control the land use process though.
Thank you. Larry, I see you have your hands up, but unfortunately I've closed public comment unless there's some.
Chart of the approval process. City planning and development. In fact, doing that, we're going to do them in parallel.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And for the video, Larry was confirming that the planning department is working on the flow. And we'll have one that compares the S1 original zoning district to the overlay district flow. But I feel like we've talked about this a few times, but this is the first time that we've really just kind of detailed it from start to finish, from concept to permits. So, okay. Ryan, before we go, there was a couple of comments in the comments that we received since the November meeting that I wanted to bring up, but anything else that you wanted to respond to, anything that you heard for public comment?
Tonight, no. I kind of want to respond to all of it, but I can't remember all of it, to be honest with you. Yeah, I want to keep reiterating because I feel like there keeps being this conversation about no vision or plan, right? I did a concept plan that allowed me to start the blocking of this zoning, right? But my approach is not that, right? My approach is different than the old approach. The traditional approach is someone would bring in a plan and some renderings up front and then try to get the zoning to work with that plan and renderings, right? That's not what I do. It is the opposite of what I do, frankly, right? Because I determined 15, 20 years ago that doesn't work very well, right? So my experience has been very positive in setting up zoning codes that create great form and walkable places where they're appropriate and where people want them. And the majority of people, I should say. And ultimately then allow the market to come in and build under those codes, right? So that's the differential here that I know is hard to understand because the public is used to the other way, right? But I can tell you that I am highly confident that this will help. It won't solve all of our problems, to be clear, right? Like it doesn't change the economics of the world, right? Interest rates don't change because we put a form-based code in place, right? Construction costs don't change because we put a form-based code in place. Rents or purchase prices don't change. All these things don't change because of the form-based code, but what the form-based code does is it makes the rules very clear for investors and developers to come into the market, right? Up front, they have visibility, they know what they're getting involved in, right? And it's pretty stringent on how they can build buildings, right? And it's flexible on those uses, but we've had a lot of debate of where those uses should or shouldn't be allowed.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I do take a little offense and feel very disrespected that you continually refer to the commission and the public as it's just so difficult to understand. As someone who does planning professionally across the globe, I've seen both conceptual plans done for existing communities, such as the one I was involved in Eatonville, Florida, the first Black municipality, where we were able to do infill concepts using form-based code. Doesn't mean those things will be built, but it helped demonstrate the existing assets that may be retained and can be used to convey and leverage the value of a significant place. So your entire characterization of Severance as being something that, it's got so many challenges. We know, we live here. We've lived here, some of us for 40, 50 years or their entire lives. So the story we want you to convey and the voice and value and vision that people are asking of you is to recognize that we're not stupid, that we understand the challenges of this place, but we also act and ask for exceptional representation of the existing community who lives in Severance. There's a tower there, multiple towers, public housing. I've heard nothing addressed. How will this potentially affect, how could it long-term affect, not an utter word of the actual community who lives and uses Severance daily. So I had to say that because it happened the last meeting and it's continuing to happen here. We understand you've worked on this. It's your job to demonstrate to us why your plan is valuable, well thought out and executed, not tell us we don't understand.
I apologize. I didn't mean that. I'm just trying to be sensitive to the concept. Everybody has different levels of education on this stuff, so I get it. So sorry.
Know your audience. Yep.
Okay. I have a couple comments I wanted to ask, a couple of comments that we've received since the November meeting that I wanted to bring up. And I think you saw this, so tell me if, and this may have been in this document, whatever we're calling this document, that you may have responded to already, but just for, I guess, public conversation. So Councilman-elect Joe DeWitt Foy had sent over a few comments around affordable housing, program thresholds for retail, and then and site development standards around the maximum building height. So can we just, those three pieces, just refresh your memory. So on affordable housing, Councilman-elect DeWitt Foy was suggesting that instead of the proposed minimum 20% of units to be affordable, up to 80% AMI, propose a slightly more modest requirement of 10% of units affordable, up to 80% of AMI, and an additional 10% at up to 100% AMI. Did you already address that or thoughts on that?
I'm supportive of that. I haven't spoken to other council members about that or council-elect members about that, but I am supportive of that, yeah.
Okay. Has anybody on the commission have strong opinions on the balance of the affordable housing requirements?
I guess my, and maybe this is just my lack of knowledge of if the city has some sort of community benefits agreements already that define this elsewhere.
We do not.
If the Planning Commission doesn't have a strong opinion on this, I'm inclined to support Councilman DeWitt Foy's recommendation. So I would like to ask planning staff to include that in our recommendations to council. And to be
I want to be clear to the commissioner.
Yeah.
Did you get your question answered?
I don't know if I'm in complete agreement with that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think one of the things in my day job just recognizes, I think even 100% of poverty is not high enough to go up to. I would actually argue to 120 to try and capture people. I mean, there's plenty of people who work, earn incomes well above poverty levels are just completely just really low. But there's plenty of people who struggle to find housing, even up to, you could say 120, even 150% of poverty. So if I were going to make some sort of change, I would ratchet that up to 120.
I just want to clarify that poverty levels are a different measurement than area median incomes. So I just want to make sure that we're clear that yes, and I don't have a problem with 120. Honestly, I was trying to make this more affordable, right? Like most of the time I go into communities and developers are fighting against any affordability requirements, right? So my 20% to 80 was my suggestion. I'm totally flexible on that. And it doesn't mean people can't build more affordable or, market rate, right? It's just, it's a portion of it. So I just want to make sure I'm being clear about that.
So would you like to recommend, I want to convey a recommendation to council on this. I mean, I know that this was a question that they had, and they might change it, but I do want to convey a recommendation.
I like having some focus on affordable units in here, and I think 20% is reasonable overall. But I think having a AMI up to 120, it makes a lot more sense.
So 20% up to 120, or 10% up to 80 or 100, and then additional 10% up to 100 and 120?
We could keep the 10 to 80, and then we could change the other 10 to go to 120 instead of 100, if that makes sense.
Okay. Any other input, thoughts, agreement, disagreement? No? Okay. So our recommendation on code number 1149.22C would be to change the affordability proportions, have a minimum of 10% of units to be affordable at up to 80% AMI, and another 10% of units to be affordable up to 120% AMI. Okay. The second question that Councilman-elect DeWitt Foy had around the proportion of retail versus other uses, and he was suggesting lowering the proposed retail restaurant entertainment limit from 175,000 to 100,000 square feet and reallocating that space to increase the limits of office, professional, medical, and/or light industrial / artisan production. I guess my question to you is, this is a maximum, right? So I think and Councilman-elect Foy is not here to elaborate, but I think what he's saying is that even 175,000 might be too much, and it may run the risk of cannibalizing our other business districts in the city. So thoughts on the balance, I suppose, of retail versus office, essentially, and whether it makes sense to reduce the amount of retail, reduce the maximum amount of retail.
Yeah, I mean, I would be supportive of reducing the retail and swapping it over to another use. If we just add to both, and there's impacts to that, right? So when I did my initial retail analysis on full build out, I was estimating an absorption of 95,000 square feet. So I'm okay bringing that down. Our suggestion was just to go higher if retail starts coming back in another direction than it's going today. But I would be fine with shifting those. I would just say that another concept that we were talking about with the planning department that we think we're going to add is that I think SAG has mentioned that, you know, what if we want to get like a larger institution in here or an educational institution and they're capped at this number. So we were going to suggest to add language to the code such that the caps, not for the residential, but for the other commercial components, can be pierced if the planning department zoning administrator makes a recommendation to the planning commission, and the planning commission as to additional study that's necessary to pierce the cap, and the planning commission approves that. So we were going to make that tweak to help alleviate the concern over the caps on the commercial side. But we do want to make sure that at that level, there's some additional work done.
Yeah, I think that was mentioned to me by planning staff as we were working together on this, and I'm very supportive of that. But I guess as I'm thinking about what Councilman-elect DeWitt Foy is recommending, I'm concerned that lowering the maximum might create more process for something like because this includes entertainment, something like an Urban Air, which is going into, University Heights. Those type of entertainment spaces are huge.
Yeah, they're larger
by design, and I would hate for an entertainment opportunity to be limited by this retail, where it's not necessarily cannibalizing from our other business districts because it's something unique in Cleveland Heights. So I don't know, I'm open to Commissioner's sense, but because this is a maximum, not a minimum, I'm inclined to leave it as is in the recommendations. I'm seeing nodding from Commissioner Surratt and Horowitz. Okay, all right. Okay, we're gonna just move closer.
Obviously, at one point, this was a regional retail destination. There were 2 department stores here. Later was a Walmart here. Okay, those days are gone. But I think we just want enough ground level retail to make this a lively, walkable place, including for the people who live there. I mean, there are apartment buildings around the edge, there are townhouses there, and I think that there hopefully will be some new residential development on the Walmart and the Regal Cinema site. So there should be some ground floor retail to serve the residents and make it a lively, pedestrian-oriented place. I mean, that's a goal.
Yeah. Okay, and then the last piece is the SO1 Development Standard 3 has an 8-story maximum. Development Standard 2 has a 6-story maximum. This is something I actually taught. This was one of my initial concerns, and I talked to planning staff about it, who pointed me to the 8-story apartment buildings in Van Aken in relation to...
Actually, the Van Aken's building, the Rave, is 18 stories and 15 stories. Now, there's elevation change. I mean, the topography changes. But the new apartment building that they're building that's at the corner of Orangeville Center and a residential street behind it is going to be 5 stories.
So I guess my question is for the commission, did anyone else have concerns? I mean, I felt my concerns were alleviated because it does require the maximum. The standard 3 requires a larger footprint, so to speak, square footage footprint for an 8-story building. But did anybody else have concerns around the height?
Thank you again. No, actually, I mean, if you look at everything that's built along Taylor Road, those are all roughly 8 stories or so. The Concord, Kensington, and the CMHA housing. So we don't even notice it anymore. So I guess I'm not especially worried about that.
Okay. All right, those were the comments that I wanted to bring forth that weren't addressed either in public comment or that we hadn't talked about between the last meeting and this meeting. Any other specific recommendations? And just to close that out, the only change that we did make was around the proportion of affordable housing requirements. That's the only additional recommendation that we have thus far that we're sending to council. Any other recommended changes on anything in the overlay that we want to recommend to council at this time?
My original concern was that by laying out the blocks before there was any development proposal, it may be overly restrictive, but then I think that question has been answered, or that issue's been answered by Ryan saying, this can be changed. This block layout can be changed. Now, there are certain things about buildings being up against the street and active ground floors. That's all baked in. But if this street layout needs to change a bit because a developer comes in and proposes something similar but not quite this way, that can be done. Those changes in the block layout plan can be amended. Am I right in thinking that?
It can be amended, and what's coming is the change that if there is to be civic space,
yes,
that civic space would almost trigger like a release valve on the streets, that if you want to put green space where a street is, or a civic space rather, where a street is, that would be allowed.
And I do agree that a larger centrally located civic space than is shown on Ryan's plan is something worth pursuing. I agree with that.
Does the commission have an opinion on the size of that space? I'm just curious. SAG was 4 acres. I'm at like 2 + 1 now with that space. I just don't know. Like splash pad, that's like, 2,000 square feet, right? So I think there's a lot of room on these spaces, and it's hard scale-wise to understand that when you're looking at a thing on a screen, but it's a lot of space. But if the commission has like some number that they're targeting, because listen, again, we're going to change the code so that it can happen, whether it's 4 acres, 8 acres, 12 acres, that's going to be in there, right? But I'm happy to have that conversation and have some real deep thought about programming and things like that, right? And then we have to figure out, like I said, the economics of it, right?
Yeah, I will say for myself that I do think there was a comment tonight about the fact that we do already have a lot of green space. So which I think is fair. My purpose in pushing on the civic space requirement for public green space was to create a convening area for community that leads into City Hall, because in my opinion, that represents the deep civic sense of responsibility that our city has and gives you a center for activism in front of a government building that we otherwise don't have here in Cleveland Heights, and something similar to the free stamp space by the City Hall in Cleveland, but bigger and nicer. And if you really want to think grandly, the National Mall is clearly that, right? Large green space in front of some of our most iconic civic buildings. So that was my idea, which is why either 7 or 12 to me, not knowing the acreage, but just the placement and the movement up, I would almost like to see 11 and the green space below it swapped, because for me, it's more about placement than size.
Well, listen, the code allows us to change that.
Right.
Okay, so we can change that.
But that's one opinion of 7. So if anybody
But
else.
I'm happy to hear, I want to just hear people's
What?
thoughts on it, because that is.
Yes, yeah.
So I disagree.
Okay.
I think when Severance was being redone the last time, and when the city new hall was being built and designed, and originally it was going to face the entry road, and we rotated around to face Severn, and had had a walkway that went into Severn Center. It's still there. And the idea was to connect them. It didn't do anything. It didn't connect anything. I'm more concerned with how that whole development functions as a development. If the logical place for gathering and, for people walking around and just bumping into each other is more towards the center of the development, and that's where it should be. I don't think it should be, the consideration should be whether or not people can every now and again have a demonstration in front of City Hall.
Yeah, Jessica, I do agree that civic green spaces are most successful when they are surrounded by active spaces, including housing, retail. So it's not kind of, why would I go there? There's nothing next to it. So I do think having that green space integrated into a plan with first floor retail and housing and making it a place that's attached to something makes a lot of sense.
For the existing developments, is it 20% or 30% that's required?
30% permeable, right? We have a 70% to 30% ratio.
Sorry.
So the impermeable, like green space to build, it's 70 to 30, right? Or 30 to 70, 30% green space, yeah.
I presume that number was arrived by some kind of study, like a value of, heat island reduction from green space. There's some rationale behind that number, or I guess my leading question is, to me, it seems reasonable. It would be no less than the existing 30% in some manner, and or argued by reasonable study why less would be supportive of 50-year, 100-year climate change in Cleveland Heights. So considering green space for resilience of the city in some manner.
I think the only question I would ask you, though, is if it's 30% of the whole site, certainly the conservation. I mean, we're talking about, I think it's almost two separate questions, because what we're talking about is like where or how should the green space be within the developed part of it, not necessarily like the site writ large.
In my personal opinion, it would be reactive to what's being constructed. I think in a similar way the applicant's proposing, but it would be applied in a way that is providing back benefits to the community. So there'd have to be some kind of rationale developed, if there's green space added on top of the structure, or some kind of our sustainability guidelines to help offset that in addition to civic space, but there should be rationale applied to it, not just our feelings on where green space goes, because 50, 100 years will be vastly different than today.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that what the code does provide for is the required 10% that then allows that flexibility, you know, to be purchased and transferred and, you know, the money going to something else. So I think that's kind of baked in already is my understanding. Vice Chair Gainier,
Just
you have, oh, sorry, you want to
fairness, I mean, I like where the commissioner is going as far as tying it to the sustainability plans of the city. We've met with the sustainability director, so we can talk about how we can tie that in the language.
Okay.
Just point of information here. Let's keep in mind that those two green spaces, one along Taylor, just north of the entrance to Severance, and then the one on Mayfield between 4 and 5, those are places where the storm water is collected.
Right.
So those, I assume, are going to have to stay as they are. They're not going to be repurposed.
Sure, they're not usable spaces. Right. They are environmentally.
Yes.
Yeah. I want to point out that one of the things that I'm going to be proposing to the city after we get through this zoning stuff is that, so the block 4 is actually owned by the city, and the green space next to that is owned by NAMDAR, right? So I'm going to be proposing that the city do a land swap to conserve that larger block as green space. And we had a conversation, we've had a couple of conversations about the fact there's a bridge in there and the brook that runs through there, and how do we reconstitute that area? You know, like regeneration of that area is something that I'd like to pursue. But I can't just ask my partner to give the land away. So if we swap for a smaller space and then we develop that undeveloped spot, that's a gray field was my thought process there. That's how we came about that.
I believe.
By the way, that deal's not done, so
Oh, no, we're not.
I have to do that work.
Yeah,
I believe that green space on Mayfield Road that's kind of swampy now was once Baker Square.
No, it's number 4 is Baker Square. The green space is to the
green space
east of that.
4 is what
it has trees on it. It's literally like trees and grass.
Was there anything ever on there? I can't remember. I remember Baker Square.
I mean, Len, was there ever anything on there?
Those trees look pretty old, so I doubt it.
Okay.
I don't understand how NAMDAR got title to it is probably the question, but
yeah.
That's probably right. Actually, it's a good point. That's probably from the estate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Vice Chair, anything else? Any other changes?
I'll just throw my 2 cents in. I'm okay with the amount of green space as it's shown right now, because looking at the whole big picture with the conservation area and so forth, I think it's adequate for the size of the property. But I realize that that is going to change as development proposals come in and where things go. It could be grouped more to the liking of a lot of the comments to make a big strip down the middle in some fashion like that, but I don't want to project what that might be 2 years from now when somebody wants to build it. I just think I'm satisfied with the amount of green space that is there for the 166 acres.
On this side of the dais? Yeah.
One comment I want to make about kind of difference between green space and civic space too. So if there could be, I can imagine a scenario where maybe there's green space on both sides of a road and you close off parts of the road, right, to create that larger civic space. So we should, I think differently. It's not just when we think civic space, it doesn't have to be all green, but I think it's about how do we concentrate it, right? So it's large enough to have a real gathering.
Can I respond to that real quick?
Yeah.
I think that's a great point. And so we have different civic space standard designs in the code that you can kind of choose from. But there was a discussion around making sure some percentage of that is softscape or grass. So we did add language to the code for that, which you'll see in the next draft.
Commissioner Miles, just turn on your mic and speak real close.
And I think I'm piggybacking off of the prior comment is that and I guess I'm not as concerned about grass in green space, but civic gathering space, because some of the most exciting places, and we kept hearing about joy, and is there enough joy? In a lot of the public meetings, people were excited about why they would want to come here, and they kept talking about gathering. They weren't really talking about picnicking or sitting around or protesting, but like public art spaces can be in a smaller parcel, but it still allows people to gather. And I guess that's what I'm more concerned about than a larger aggregate of grass. More just a mind to people want to have fun here as they're walking or as they're driving, but maybe a destination for gathering in civic spaces versus a larger parcel of grass.
Yeah, I'm going to just echo what the commissioner said. My perspective on this is more smaller programmable spaces is more impactful, spread out, which is why we set up this requirement per each site development. That being said, again, we're changing the code so that you can do the bigger space also. So we have both options right now. There's a group that I used to work with a decent amount, don't really much anymore, but called Project for Public Spaces. I highly encourage you to check them out because I think they're one of the best of the best. I may be wrong.
Any last word on green spaces? Nope. Yep, go ahead.
Has the Landmarks Commission provided any feedback on the historic estates that preceded the mall? Because that's one thing I haven't really heard any conversation on, if any consideration would be to like put something back in interpretive or representative for the estate that was there.
Well, I think we saw in the comments, there was one comment from the public about this in which we established that the fountain, which I see now on the way in, the fountain is by City Hall. That was from the Severance Estate. And the stables remain, of course, they're owned by the school district. But other than that, I don't think there's any other historic.
The Landmark Commission at our most recent meeting explored the idea of landmarking the stables.
Okay, but there's no other, aside from the fountain, which we wouldn't landmark, and the stables, those are the only two remnants of the estate.
There's a stone bridge in that green space we were just discussing now, whether that's from the state or from a subsequent building, I don't know.
And I was speaking with Rich
Bozek
today.
Oh, that was the person who made the public comment.
Yeah, and Rich and I were talking about like how do we honor the historical character and nature of the place over time. I don't have the solution to that right now, but I think it's a great idea.
Great. Okay. So I I am convinced by my colleagues that we do not need to make a recommendation on I just want to state it. This is definitely an improvement from what we had before. I'm hearing that we're not going to make a recommendation on any sort of specific size or location of green space, that we find that there's enough flexibility to create that space as development continues. So Ryan, feel free to have a seat. I think we've exhausted all of the thoughts and recommendations that we may want to make for council. I just want to give every commissioner the opportunity. We have two members of council here with us tonight. We can certainly direct the rest of the members of council to the timestamp on our video, but there will be a public hearing on Monday, December 15th at 5 p.m. where the public can come and speak on this again. And then my understanding is that council will consider voting on the two ordinances at the meeting that follows at 7:30 p.m. So I just want to ask or invite any commissioner who has thoughts on this that they want to share with council in advance of the public hearing from our dais here. The floor is open. Anyone? No? Go ahead.
My broad comment is a request that the Planning Commission has asked several times throughout numerous development reviews that we've looked at for some kind of clear, consistent public engagement process that's measurable, that has some means for us to say other than we've just held meetings. There's ways to do measurable matrices, methodologies in advance for consultation plans as a requirement, particularly in something of this scale.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Okay, I'll just make one final comment on this, that for me and my position as chair of the Planning Commission, I may have read this code more, maybe not more than planning staff, but I have gone through this with a fine tooth comb, and Ryan has been very generous with his time with me as well as planning staff. I've spent a lot of time with planning staff going through this, asking a lot of questions, and I appreciate the deliberations that we had here. I want to urge council to move forward and approve and vote for the ordinances prior to the year end. And I say that wearing two hats as being an incoming councilwoman that would potentially vote on this. If I were in office now on council, I would vote for this plan. I'm very comfortable with this. The recommendations that we've made, I think, are substantive and significant and have improved this plan significantly. Thanks very much for the planning staff's support on that and Ryan's partnership, frankly, to get this to a place where the Planning Commission would feel comfortable with it. I know that it wasn't a unanimous vote, which is unusual for us, but we certainly did have a significant amount of consensus. And I'm optimistic that as someone who's still dealt with zoning code for 10 years now in Cleveland Heights, that this is a huge step forward for our city and provides us an opportunity to move forward on a very important piece of property for us, and one, frankly, that the city has zero control over other than imposing land use conditions, which I think is something very important for everyone to keep in mind, that this is our lever, this is our responsibility, and this is one that we took very seriously, and certainly the Planning Commission has put forth all of that, all of those recommendations. And so I guess my question for staff is that in advance of the public hearing, because I do hear the concern that there hasn't been an updated package available for the public to review with a new regulating plan, as well as all of the changes that we have made, which I'm very pleased about. When will we have that posted and available to the public, and when will that be conveyed to council?
So obviously it'll get conveyed to council before the end of the week because their packets have to be sent out to them. And we do have the most recent version, as you're seeing on the screen, which we can get posted on the website that we have for the Severance redevelopment.
Just have to go back.
At the last Planning Commission meeting, as an example, we made all these comments. You asked me to put them into a PDF so that the council could see them. We've made all those changes. Okay. So we've made 80 to 90% of these changes already that we've talked about. Some of the things tonight, they're thankful they're word changes, right? We can make that are not complicated. I do have a company and I have to balance my staffing. So I think we can publish something, by Friday early as possible afternoon.
Well, and that would be available then, I'm confirming with staff, that would be available then on the council packet that's posted on the website.
I would think that would be a true statement. I'm not the council's clerk, so I can't speak for her.
So my request would be, with council members sitting here, and my request to planning staff is to ask the communications department in the city to put in the Friday night newsletter a link to wherever this could be found, whether it's the council packet, whether it's the Severance Landing site, wherever, and to share that this is an updated version.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. I understand now.
Okay.
And I think just in support of staff's hard work, right? We worked really hard on that 70 comment sheet and all the responses. So that's been up since last week. So most of these changes, other than the ones we talked about tonight, are reflected in that comment sheet. Some of them you mentioned that we didn't settle in that comment sheet have been settled today.
Right.
Yeah. And while this is a very, very big project and a big zoning change, this is typical of zoning changes in the process, is that typically there are comments by planning commission or the public. And so changes are made from that initial legislation piece that's to the end. So, and that's the point of the process. Is
if changes weren't made, I think we'd have more to be upset about.
Concerned about, that's right.
Concerned, yeah. Okay, thank you, Ryan. Okay, with that, there's nothing to vote on as we discussed. Did the planning staff have any old business? I see we have two things. No.
No old
Okay.
business time.
Just before we let everybody, it's not 11 o'clock yet, but I just point of personal, this is my last planning commission meeting after being on the planning commission. This is the 12th month of the 10th year that I've been on the planning commission. More than older than my 10-year-old son. And it has been the honor and privilege, a very special honor and privilege to serve in this capacity. I will miss this group. I will miss, I will work with staff, I think, much more, but I will miss this particular work that we do together and the ability to impact some of our biggest development. I just want to thank the commissioners and all the staff for your partnership and your friendship and your support and your agreeing and disagreeing and your laughter when I make silly jokes and all of those things over these last 10 years. Again, it's truly been an honor and I want to thank you all. So thank you. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Oh, Len wanted to say something. Yes, Len. No, that's right. I forgot. We're going to do that earlier. Yes, go ahead.
I exercise this
A moment.
rare privilege of getting to give a second farewell speech in 2 weeks. Last week, City Council, and this week to my longest lasting home in service to Cleveland Heights. And I just wanted to mention a few things about staff over the years. I think we've had some great planning staff. Our planning director when I was on council was Howard Mayer, who was there for a number of years and then became the executive director of NOACA. And Richard Wong presided for a number of years, culminating in the Ascent development, which we knew for 4 years as Top of the Hill. So I still think of it as Top of the Hill. And now followed, of course, by our current director, Eric Zamft, and all of our present staff. And I just wanted to mention the people we see all the time, Karen and Christy and Brooke. And I'll even give a little shout out here to our legal guy. Oh yeah, Justin Hines. Yeah. And as well as the people who are a lot less visible, who, the public doesn't see as much, the people in economic development, GIS. We have a GIS guy. Sustainability, And I wanted to mention a couple of our planning alums. Joyce Braverman worked with us for a number of years and is now the planning director at Shaker Heights. And Kara O'Donnell, who was here for a lot of years and is now second in command in Shaker Heights. So if nothing else, we've got a good training ground for people who go on to greater things. Just wanted to shout out also to Mike Unger. You can tell him that, Craig. Oh, he's not on council anymore, never mind. Who served on Planning Commission for many, many years and was chair for a lot of those years and did a great job. And before that, Bob Madison. I don't know how many people would remember Robert Madison from Robert P. Madison International, a company that's still in business, run by his kids, as far as I can tell, and maybe grandkids, I don't know. So just a shout out to Bob. He just celebrated his 102nd birthday. So, and just want to lastly recognize my fellow commission members. Just hearing everybody tonight, I thought, oh yeah, I can retire. This is in good hands. Ken and Judy and Jess and Mike and another Jessica. And see, now you won't be other Jessica anymore. And Bob, I just feel is the best group we've had in my memory. And I'm leaving with the knowledge that the Planning Commission will continue to do great work for the people and businesses of Cleveland Heights. So thank you for 26 great years working with all of you to make Cleveland Heights a city where all are welcome.
And with that,
Madam Chair, just before you close, we just want to make sure that everybody realizes that we're moving our January Planning Commission meeting date because we will have 2 vacancies on Planning Commission and we want to allow City Council some time to make some appointments. So the new meeting date is when, Justin? You've got the schedule in front of you.
January 20th.
January 29th.
Okay.
So the meeting will be late in the month so that hopefully we'll have 2 new members.
And with that, we're adjourned. Have a good night, everyone.